5 armed men. Outside, they are coming for you. She wrote those 7 words with shaking hands, a 16-year-old deaf girl standing alone in the middle of a room full of the most feared bikers in Arizona. She had no voice, no phone, no way to call for help. She ran miles through desert heat, bleeding, exhausted, terrified, and she ran toward danger, not away from it. If this story already gave you chills, you haven't heard anything yet. Subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Nobody in Red Hollow, Arizona ever paid much attention to Evelyn Carter. That was the truth of her life, and she had a kind of peace with it. The quiet, painful peace of someone who has been overlooked so many times that invisibility starts to feel like a personality. She was 16 years old. She had long blonde hair that she tucked behind her ears when she was nervous, which was most of the time. She had bright gray eyes that moved constantly, scanning rooms, reading faces, watching hands. And she had been deaf since birth, not hard of hearing, actually deaf. Completely, profoundly, permanently deaf. She had never heard a single sound in her entire life. Rain on a rooftop, not her mother's voice, not music, not sirens, not laughter, not her own name spoken out loud by someone who loved her. And yet Evelyn Carter noticed everything. That was the trade the universe had made with her, though nobody around her seemed to understand it. You can't hear, you watch. When you can't listen to what people say, you learn to read what people do. You read the tension in someone's jaw before they decide they're angry. You see the flicker in someone's eyes before they decide to lie. You notice the way a man's hand drifts toward his pocket when he's nervous, or the way a group of people shift their weight when something is about to go wrong. Evelyn Carter had been reading the world that way for 16 years. On the afternoon that changed her life forever, she was reading it harder than she ever had before. It was a Tuesday in late September, and the heat in Red Hollow had not gotten the message that summer was supposed to be over. The temperature was hovering somewhere above 100 degrees. The sky was pale and bleached, the kind of white that means the sun has burned away every trace of blue. The sidewalks were cracked. The air smelled like hot pavement and dust, and something faintly chemical that nobody in town ever talked about. Evelyn was walking home from school. She always took the long way. She had 3 different routes she could choose from: the short way, the medium way, and the long way, and she almost always chose the long way, even when she was tired, even when it added 20 extra minutes to her walk. The reason was simple, and she never talked about it with anyone, not even with her best friend Maya. Communicated with her through sign language and handwritten notes and a shared shorthand built from years of sitting next to each other in every class. The long way was quieter, not quiet in the way most people meant when they used that word. Evelyn always were quiet. Every route, every room, every moment of her life existed in the same profound silence. But the long way was quieter in a way she felt in her chest rather than in her ears. Fewer people, fewer faces turning toward her with that particular expression, the one that was halfway between pity and discomfort, the look people got when they remembered she was deaf and didn't know what to do with that information. On the long way home, she passed by the old industrial stretch on the edge of town. Abandoned buildings, mostly. A couple of roadside businesses that had never fully recovered from whatever economic blow had hit Red Hollow 15 years ago. Storage facility with a broken fence. An old auto shop with plywood over the windows, and at the far end of the road, a building everyone in town called the warehouse, a big, flat-roofed structure with no signage and no visible purpose that anyone could explain. She wasn't thinking about the warehouse that afternoon. She was thinking about the math test she had failed. She was thinking about the look on her mother's face when she came home, that tight, exhausted look that meant a hard day at work and no patience left for anything complicated. She was thinking about the fact that it was Tuesday, and Tuesday meant the refrigerator was probably close to empty because they didn't go to the store until Wednesday, and sometimes Wednesday got pushed to Thursday. She was thinking about small, heavy things. She was not thinking about the 5 men crouched beside the warehouse. Her eyes found them anyway. That was the thing about the way Evelyn Carter moved through the world. Her body had learned to notice threat, the way other people's ears learn to notice a strange sound. It was automatic. It was below the level of conscious thought. She didn't decide to look at the 5 men. Her eyes just stopped, the way your foot stops before you step on something sharp. She stopped walking. She stood very still. There were 5 of them. They were positioned behind a line of old equipment metal barrels, stacked pallets, a rusted piece of machinery she couldn't identify, and they were doing something that her brain processed in pieces before it assembled the whole picture. One of them was holding a rifle, not a hunting rifle, not the kind of gun a person carries in a case with a strap and brings out on weekends. This was a different kind. She had seen enough pictures in enough news articles to know the difference, even if she has never stood this close to one in her life. It was short and dark and held against the man's body with the casual ease of someone who was used to holding it. The second man was holding a handgun tucked against his side, was crouched over. Something spread out on the flat top of one of the barrels. She couldn't see it clearly from this angle, but the shape of it was wrong for tools, wrong for food, wrong for anything ordinary. Her mind filed it as a map or a diagram of some kind. The fourth man had binoculars. He was looking toward the other end of the road. Evelyn's gaze followed the direction of the binoculars. The building at the other end was a clubhouse. She knew what it was because everyone in Red Hollow knew what it was. Vehicles parked outside made it unmistakable, rows of them, chrome and black and loud, at least on the days when people were coming and going. There was a flag above the door, though she was too far away to read what it said. There were men she could see through the open front, moving around inside the Hells Angels clubhouse. She looked back at the 5 men with the guns. She looked at the binoculars pointed at the clubhouse. She looked at the map or diagram spread on the barrel. She looked at the rifle, and she understood with a cold and absolute certainty what was about to happen. Instinct was to get out, to back away slowly, the way every sensible part of her brain was screaming at her to do, and to find somewhere safe and think. That was the smart thing. That was the thing that would keep her alive. She reached for her phone. Dead. She had forgotten to charge it the night before because she had fallen asleep doing homework, and nobody had woken her up because nobody in her house was particularly tuned in to the rhythm of her daily needs. She stared at the black screen for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds of pure panic. The kind that doesn't make noise, that lives entirely in the chest and the stomach. Then she started thinking. The police station was, she calculated, probably 2.5 miles in the opposite direction. The gas station on Crenshaw Road had a payphone, but she was deaf. She couldn't use a payphone. She couldn't walk up to the station attendant and explain quickly enough. Couldn't make him understand in time. There was no clean solution there. She could try to flag down a car. She looked up and down the road. There were no cars. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Red Hollow, Arizona, on an empty industrial road in 98-degree heat. There were no cars because nobody came this way who didn't have a specific reason to come this way. She looked back at the men. One of them was checking his watch. That small gesture, that simple checking of a watch, hit her harder than anything else had. Because checking a watch means you are waiting for a specific time. It means you have a schedule. It means whatever is going to happen has a countdown attached to it, and the countdown is already running. She looked at the clubhouse at the end of the road. Men moving around inside, not alert, not ready, going about their afternoon with no idea what was sitting 200 yards away watching them through binoculars. She thought about walking away. She thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. And then she thought about those men inside the clubhouse, and she thought about 5 armed people with a timetable, and she thought about the fact that she was the only person who knew. She was the only person on earth who knew. She took 1 step toward the clubhouse, then another. Then she was running. She had never been a runner. Evelyn Carter was a reader, a watcher, a quiet person who walked places and thought while she walked. She had not run with any purpose since the 6th grade, when her PE teacher had made the entire class do a mile run, and she had come in 3rd to last. It was not her thing. It had never been her thing. She ran. She ran because there was nothing else to run with except her own legs, and her legs were all she had. She ran across the cracked pavement in the heat that wrapped around her like something solid, like a wall she kept breaking through with her body. She ran, and her backpack bounced against her spine with every step, and her lungs started burning almost immediately because she was not in shape for this, and the heat was not making it easier, and the road was longer than it looked. She had a moment about 30 seconds in where the fear tried to stop her. Not fear of the men behind her, though that was there, a cold, constant presence at the back of her mind. A different fear, the fear of what was ahead. the fear of the doors she was running toward, and the men behind those doors, the Hell's Angels, the people everyone in Red Hollow talked about in lowered voices, the people parents mentioned to their kids as cautionary examples. She had read, really, had read other people's conversations about them, enough stories to have a picture in her mind of what it would be like to walk through that door, what it would feel like, how those men would look at her. She ran anyway, because the alternative was worse. She reached the door. She didn't knock. Knocking felt wrong. Knocking was for situations that had time, and this situation didn't have time. Grabbed the door handle, shoved it open, and walked in. The room went silent. She felt the silence differently than most people would. She felt it in the way movement stopped, the way bodies turned, the way the air in the room seemed to change texture. 15, 20, maybe more men, all of them looking at her. A 16-year-old girl with blonde hair and a backpack and lungs that were burning, standing in the doorway of a place she had absolutely no business being. Someone stepped toward her. He was tall, very tall, with gray hair cut short and a face that had lived a long time in it. He wasn't young. He moved with a particular kind of authority, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that just exists. He wore a vest covered in patches, and the patches told a story she didn't have time to read. His eyes were calm. That surprised her. She had expected aggressive. She had expected hostile. His eyes were calm. He stopped about 4 feet from her. He said something. She couldn't hear it, obviously, but she could read the shape of his mouth well enough to catch a word or two. Maybe. You lost? Possibly. She was already pulling her notebook out. She always carried a notebook. It was as essential to her as her phone was. To other people, maybe more essential, because unlike her phone, it never ran out of battery. It was a small, spiral-bound thing, college-ruled, and she went through one every couple of months. She flipped to a blank page so fast she bent the wire spine. She wrote as fast as she had ever written anything in her life. 5 armed men, outside, they are coming for you. She tore the page out and shoved it at the man. He took it. She watched his eyes move across the words. She watched his face. She had gotten very good at reading faces. It was part of the same trade she'd made with the universe, the same bargain that came with deafness. She could read a face the way some people read a sentence. What she saw move across his face in the 2 seconds it took him to read her 7 words was something she would think about for years afterward. Not disbelief, not dismissal, something harder and more serious than either of those. He looked up from the note and looked at her, and his eyes asked a question that his mouth probably did too. Are you sure? She nodded. He turned and said something to the room. The next 60 seconds were unlike anything Evelyn Carter had ever witnessed, which had been still and stunned a moment ago, became something else entirely fast, coordinated, purposeful. Men moved to doors, men moved to windows. Someone pulled out a phone. Someone picked up something from a shelf near the wall, and she caught the glint of it and looked away. People were talking fast, and she couldn't hear any of it. She could feel the urgency through the floor, the vibration of boots on concrete, through the way the room reorganized itself around a single point of focus. The tall man, she would learn later, that his name was Grayson Cole, that he was the chapter president, that people called him Gray, and that his word in that room was the closest thing to law, was at the center of all of it. He was not yelling. He didn't seem like a man who yelled. He was speaking with a quiet intensity that she could see working on the men around him. They listened the way people listen when someone has earned it. He came back to her. He had a piece of paper in his hand. Now someone had given him paper, and he wrote something and held it up. How many? What weapons? How close? She took the paper. 5, 1 rifle, at least 2 handguns, maybe more. They're behind the old equipment outside the warehouse. They had binoculars. They were watching this building. One of them checked his watch. They have a time. She gave the paper back. He read it. His jaw shifted slightly. That was the only outward sign. He wrote again, how do you know? She wrote, I saw them. I was walking past. He wrote, why did you come here instead of calling police? She wrote, my phone is dead. The police station is too far. I don't know how much time you have. He looked at that last line for a moment. Then he wrote one more thing and held it up. What's your name? She almost didn't answer that. It felt so strange, so ordinary against everything that was happening. Someone wanting to know her name, like they were meeting at a party, like this was a normal situation where names were the relevant thing. She wrote it anyway, Evelyn. He nodded. He said something. She caught her name in the shape of his mouth, just the first syllable. Stay here. Don't go near the doors or windows. Safe. And then he turned back to the controlled chaos of his men. And Evelyn Carter stood in the middle of the Hells Angels clubhouse with her notebook in her hand and her heart trying to escape through her rib cage. And she thought, nobody has ever told me I was safe before. What happened in the next 8 minutes was something she pieced together from what she saw and what was told to her later. Mason sent men out through the back, flanking wide around the building, to get eyes on the warehouse from a position that couldn't be observed. He had someone on the phone with county law enforcement. He had other men on phones she saw at 4, 5, 6 people on their phones at the same time, and the conversations looked urgent. In the way that conversations look urgent when you're deaf and reading them, the body language of the people talking was compressed, serious, nothing wasted. Meanwhile, someone came and stood near Evelyn, not close enough to crowd her, close enough to make clear that she was being watched over. He was younger than most of the others, with a dark beard and a tattoo on his neck, and he offered her a bottle of water from somewhere with a gesture that was unmistakably gentle. She took it. She drank half of it in one go, which surprised her, and then she realized she hadn't noticed how thirsty she was until that moment, how completely her body had been running on adrenaline and will. The young man with the neck tattoo wrote something on his phone and showed her the screen. You doing okay? She almost laughed. It came out as a breath instead. She made the sign for okay with her right hand thumb and first finger in a circle without thinking, the reflex of someone who signed first and wrote second and then felt immediately self-conscious because she didn't know if he could understand ASL. He looked at the sign. He looked at her face. He made the okay sign back, slightly uncertain, like he was trying it on. She nodded, looked away. She was not okay. She was shaking. She could feel it now that the running had stopped, the fine trembling in her hands, the way her knees felt slightly wrong, the way her vision at the edges was not entirely steady. She pressed the water bottle between both palms and focused on breathing. The men Grayson had sent around the back came back. She couldn't hear what they said, but she watched Grayson's face as they reported to him. And what she saw confirmed everything. He didn't look surprised. He looked resolved. He looked like someone absorbing a piece of information that required action and was already calculating what that action would be. He glanced over at her across the room. She held his gaze. He gave her a single nod, small, deliberate, and then turned back to his men. At some point during the next 10 minutes, the sound she couldn't hear must have been significant because she saw it in every face in the room. The exhale, the slight release of tension, the shift from the particular alertness of waiting for something terrible to the different alertness of something that has been averted. Enforcement had arrived. She could see that much through the front window, not clearly, but enough. There were lights, the strobing blue and red that she had learned to read as sirens even when she couldn't hear them. There was movement outside, organized and official. One of the men near the window turned and said something to the room. 2 words from his lips. All 5. She let out a breath she had been holding since she picked up her notebook. Grayson came back to her. He stood in front of her and he looked at her for a moment in a way that wasn't uncomfortable, wasn't pitying, wasn't the particular look she got from people who didn't know how to deal with her deafness. He looked at her the way someone looks at a person they are seeing clearly, maybe for the first time. He picked up the paper they had been writing back and forth on. He wrote, "You ran here." She wrote, "Yes." He wrote, "From the warehouse." She wrote, "Yes." He wrote, "That's almost a mile." She wrote, "2 Psalms." She paused, then added, "I didn't know what else to do." He looked at that for a moment. Then he wrote something slowly, deliberately, and held the paper up so she could read it clearly. "You saved lives today. I want you to know that." Evelyn Carter stood in the Hells Angels clubhouse in Red Hollow, Arizona, with her notebook against her chest, and she read those words. She had been told she was a burden. She had been told without anyone using that specific word that she required more than she gave. She had been told this through silences, through exasperation, through the particular brand of love that came wrapped in exhaustion. She had been told this through the way people's eyes moved past her in conversations she couldn't fully follow, through the way teachers addressed themselves to the room and only remembered to face her directly when a specialist told them to. She had never been told she saved lives. She read those words 3 times. Then she looked up at Grayson Cole, Chapter President of the Hells Angels. Red Hollow chapter. And she did not cry. She nodded. And somewhere deep inside her, in a place that had been quiet for 16 years, something changed. The questions started coming after the police had secured the scene outside. Two officers came in. She saw them enter, saw Grayson go to meet them, saw the conversation that followed. She was asked to come forward, and she did. One of the officers, a woman with her hair in a tight bun, professional and efficient, had clearly worked with deaf individuals before. She wrote her questions on a notepad, rather than speaking and waiting for someone to interpret. That small accommodation, that simple courtesy, hit Evelyn somewhere unexpected. She answered everything, honestly. She told them where she had been walking. She told them what she had seen. She told them about the rifle and the binoculars and the man checking his watch. She told them about her dead phone. She told them she had run to the nearest place she could find people. Officer wrote, "Why this place specifically?" Evelyn considered the question. Then she wrote, "Because there were people here. Because I didn't have time to be afraid of who they were." The officer read that and looked up at her with an expression that wasn't quite a smile, but was close to one. She wrote something on her pad and showed it to Evelyn. "You're very brave." Evelyn didn't know what to write back to that, so she didn't write anything. She just looked at the word brave for a second and thought about how strange it was to be called brave by someone for doing the only thing she could think of to do. When everything had calmed, when the police had cleared the scene and taken statements, and the room had returned to something closer to normal, one of the bikers brought out a chair and put it near the wall and gestured to it, clearly offering her a place to sit. She sat. Her legs were grateful. She was aware that she was still in a room full of strangers, in a place she had never been, with a group of people she didn't know. The fear had changed quality. It wasn't gone. She wasn't sure fear ever really went away completely, not for her, but it had transformed into something smaller and less urgent, something that she could sit with instead of being controlled by. People passed in and out of her field of vision. Some of them looked at her. A few of them said things to the air near her that she couldn't catch. One older man with a white beard and a patched vest crouched down in front of her chair and looked her in the eye and said something slowly, deliberately, and she caught enough of it. "Thank you." She nodded. He patted her hand once gently, the way her grandmother used to pat her hand when she was small, and stood back up and walked away. The young man with the neck tattoo, she would learn later that his name was Danny, came back with another bottle of water and a bag of pretzels from somewhere and set them on the seat next to her without saying anything. He just nodded at them and walked away, an offering without performance, a small human kindness with no expectation attached. She ate the pretzels. She drank the water. She sat in the Hells Angels clubhouse in Red Hollow, Arizona, and she breathed. It was almost dark by the time someone thought to call her mother. Evelyn hadn't. Her phone was still dead, and she had been so completely consumed by everything else that she had not thought about home, not thought about the fact that she was hours past when she should have walked through the front door. Mason, who figured it out, he came to her with paper again, looking slightly abashed for someone who radiated authority as naturally as he did. "Your mother," he wrote. "Does she know where you are?" Evelyn had started to write no, and then looked up and saw the expression on his face and stopped. He was worried about her, not in the bureaucratic way the police officer had been worried, filling out forms and taking statements, not in the exhausted way her mother worried about her, that particular anxiety that was all wrapped up in the complications of raising a deaf child alone with limited resources. This was something else, something direct and human and uncomplicated. "My phone is dead. She doesn't know." He wrote, "Can I call her? Do you have her number memorized?" She did have her number memorized. She wrote it down. She watched him step aside and make the call, and she watched his face during the call, and she imagined what he was saying, explaining where Evelyn was, that she was safe, that she had done something important today, that he would make sure she got home. And whatever he said, it lasted about 4 minutes, which was longer than she expected. He came back, he wrote, "She's on her way. She's very relieved." Then he paused and wrote something else. "She's also very proud of you." Evelyn looked at that sentence. "She's also very proud of you." She didn't know if that was exactly what her mother had said, or if it was what Grayson had decided her mother would want her to know, or some combination of both. It didn't matter. She read it 4 times, slow, And then she folded the piece of paper and put it in her backpack. Between the pages of the same notebook she had written her 7 words in. Armed men. Outside, they are coming for you. 7 words that had changed everything. She sat back in the chair and closed her eyes for a moment. And in the silence of her own world, a silence that was never empty, never lonely, just different from the silence. Other people knew she let herself feel what had happened. Invisible her entire life. Today she had been impossible to ignore because of her disability, not despite it. Not in the complicated way people sometimes told her that her deafness made her special, which always felt slightly untrue, slightly patronizing, slightly beside the point. She had been impossible to ignore because she had done something, because she had seen something nobody else saw, and she had run, and she had walked through a door she was afraid of, and she had written 7 words and handed them to a stranger, because she had decided to care about lives that weren't hers. That was not nothing. She was beginning to understand everything. Her mother arrived 20 minutes later. She came through the door with the kind of energy that only a mother who has been afraid can carry, that particular compressed urgency that was all relief and leftover terror and love, so wound up in itself it barely knew which way to come out. She crossed the room and grabbed Evelyn's hands and looked at her, just looked at her, the way she hadn't looked at her in a long time. Not since Evelyn was very small, and her mother used to look at her that way all the time. Like she was something precious and also somehow miraculous, and also sometimes frightening in how much she mattered. She said something. Her lips moved, but Evelyn was too focused on her face to read the words, the way sometimes happened when emotion made it impossible to do 2 things at once. She signed back, "I'm okay." Her mother held both her hands very tight. They stood like that for a moment in the middle of the room, and the room gave them that moment. The way the room had given Evelyn everything she'd needed today, quietly and without announcement. Mason came over. He shook her mother's hand. He said something to her, and her mother listened, and Evelyn watched her mother's face go through several things at once, gratitude and fear and relief, and something that looked like it might become tears but didn't quite get there. Her mother turned to her and signed. He said, "You were the bravest person in the room." Evelyn looked at Grayson. Grayson looked at her. He didn't know sign language. He had no idea what had just been communicated. But something in the exchange must have been readable on her face, because the corner of his mouth moved just slightly in something that was not quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one. Evelyn Carter picked up her backpack. She tucked her notebook inside. She walked out of the Hells Angels clubhouse into the cooling desert evening beside her mother, and behind her the doors swung shut, and inside that room the men who had once been strangers were already becoming something else. She didn't know that yet. She would know it soon. But for now she walked home through the dark, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she did not feel invisible. She felt like someone who had done something impossible. She felt for the first time in her 16 years exactly like herself. The next morning Evelyn woke up and thought it was over. That was the thing about crisis when you were inside it. It consumed everything, every thought and breath and heartbeat. And then it ended, and you woke up in your own bed, and the ordinary world came back. And for a few seconds before full consciousness arrived, everything was normal. The ceiling looked the same. The light through the curtains looked the same. Silence was exactly what it always was. Then she remembered. She sat up fast and grabbed her notebook from the nightstand, the same notebook, the one with the bent wire spine and the torn page and the handwriting that was not hers, scattered between her own words. She held it against her chest and sat there breathing, and the whole thing came back in a rush. The 5 men, the binoculars, rifle, the run, the door, the room full of eyes, the 7 words she had written and shoved at a stranger. Armed men, outside. They are coming for you. She put the notebook down on the bed and looked at her hands. They were steady now. Yesterday they had been shaking in a way she couldn't control. Now they were steady, but they felt different, not bigger, not stronger, not any of the things she might have expected after something like yesterday. They just felt like her hands, the same hands that signed her name, that wrote her notes, that turned the pages of the book she read when she wanted to disappear from the world for a while. The same hands that had written those 7 words. She got dressed and went to the kitchen. Her mother was already up. That was unusual. Her mother worked long shifts at the dry cleaning place on Route 9 and usually slept until the last possible moment. but she was standing at the counter with a cup of coffee held in both hands. And when Evelyn came in, she turned around, and her face did the thing it had done at the clubhouse last night, that compressed, overwhelmed thing that was all emotion and no words. She set her coffee down and signed, "How are you feeling?" Evelyn signed back, "Fine." Then, because that wasn't quite honest, "Tired, but fine." Her mother looked at her for a long moment. Then she signed, slowly and deliberately, each word given its full weight. "I didn't know. I found out where you were. I didn't. I don't know what I would have done if something had happened to you." Evelyn watched her mother's hands. She had read some version of that sentence before, the worried version, the exhausted parent version. But this was different. This was her mother's face, doing something unfamiliar, something Evelyn didn't have an immediate label for. Mother continued, "Grayson Cole called me last night after you left." He called again. Evelyn's hands went stiff. "He wanted to know if you were okay." He said. Her mother paused, resetting her signs, finding the right words. "He said the people you warned could have been killed. He said they want to say thank you properly." Evelyn didn't sign anything for a moment. Then she signed, "What does properly mean?" Her mother picked up her coffee again. Hands came back. "I don't know yet, but he was very serious about it. She went to school. She almost didn't. Her mother had offered, in the careful way she offered things, to let her stay home, and Evelyn had considered it for about 45 seconds before deciding against it. Staying home meant sitting inside her own head for 8 hours. School, for all its complications, at least gave her something to look at, something to do, something that wasn't just the interior of her own thoughts, which were loud in a way that had nothing to do with sound. Maya was waiting for her at the front door, was the only person at Red Hollow High School who signed fluently enough to hold a real conversation with Evelyn. She had learned in 4th grade, when she and Evelyn had first become friends, and she had kept learning stubbornly and deliberately over the years, until she was better at it than most people who had been signing their whole lives. She had dark hair and dark eyes, and the most expressive face Evelyn had ever read, which was saying something, because Evelyn had read a lot of faces. She was signing before Evelyn even reached her. "Tell me everything. Right now. I heard something happen yesterday, and it was all over my mom's Facebook, and I almost texted you 50 times. But then I remembered your phone was dead, and I was going to drive to your house, but my mom wouldn't let me." And her hands, "Breathe." She signed. Maya breathed. So, Evelyn told her, he was. Standing outside the front doors of Red Hollow High School in the early morning, she signed the whole thing: the men, the guns, the warehouse, the dead phone, the run, the clubhouse, Grayson, the note, the 7 words. His face moved through about 15 different expressions in the span of that telling, cycling from horror to disbelief to something that looked like awe, and then back to horror again. When Evelyn finished, Maya stood there for a second with her hands at her sides. She signed, "You ran 2 miles to warn the Hells Angels." Evelyn confirmed it. "By yourself." She confirmed that too. "No phone." "Yes." Maya's hands moved. "Ev, do you understand what you did?" Evelyn thought about that for a second. "I did the only thing I could think of." Maya grabbed her by the shoulders gently. Maya was always gentle and looked her directly in the eyes. "You saved their lives," she signed. "You might have saved more than that. Those men, the ones with the guns, do you have any idea who they were?" Evelyn shook her head. "Neither do I," Maya signed, "but something tells me we're about to find out." She was right. By 3rd period, the story had spread through Red Hollow High School in the way that stories spread through small schools and small towns, fast, unstoppable, and inevitably distorted at the edges. By the time it reached Evelyn through the various notes and phone screens people shoved in front of her throughout the day, she had apparently not just warned the Hells Angels, but had also single-handedly disarmed 2 of the attackers, climbed over a fence, and flagged down a police helicopter. None of that was true. What was true was strange enough. History teacher Mr. Reyes, a good man who remembered to face her when he spoke, and had a habit of writing key points on the board without being asked, stopped her after class and wrote on a piece of paper, "I heard what happened yesterday." "You all right?" She wrote back, "Yes, I'm okay." He wrote, "I want you to know what you did took real courage. Most adults don't have." She looked at that for a moment and then wrote, "I didn't feel courageous, terrified." He read it. He nodded slowly. Then he wrote something she would think about for a long time afterward. That's exactly what courage is. She folded that paper and put it in her backpack with the other one, running out of pockets for things people were giving her to keep. It was lunchtime when the first thing happened that she hadn't expected. She was sitting with Maya in their usual spot, a table near the window in the cafeteria, close enough to the door that Evelyn could always see who was coming in, when three boys from the junior class came over and sat down across from them without being invited. This was unusual, not unprecedented, but unusual. The junior boys as a group had never specifically bothered Evelyn, but they had also never specifically sought her out. In the middles, she knew his name, was Tyler, that he was on the football team, that he existed in a social stratum that had nothing to do with hers, wrote something on his phone and slid it across the table. Uncle is in the chapter. He texted me this morning. He said to find you and tell you that you're the phone, showed the next word in caps, family. Evelyn read it twice. She slid the phone back. She wrote on her own notebook and pushed it across, tell him I'm glad everyone is okay. Tyler read it. He looked up at her. He said something she caught seriously in respect, and then he and his friends got up and left. Just like that, Maya's hand touched her arm. That just happened, she signed. Yes, Evelyn signed back. It did. What happened after school was the first thing that broke through the careful control she had been maintaining all day. She was walking to the front doors, Maya, beside her, signing something about a homework assignment she couldn't focus on when she saw the motorcycles, 6 of them, parked in the school pickup area in a line. And standing beside them were 6 men in patched vests, not doing anything, not approaching anyone, just standing there. And when Evelyn came through the doors, one of them, Danny, she recognized him immediately. The younger one with the neck tattoo, who had brought her water and pretzels, raised his hand in a wave. She stopped walking. Maya grabbed her arm. Are those? Yes, Evelyn signed. Danny walked over. He had his phone out already, typing as he came, and he held the screen up for her when he reached her. Mason sent us. He wanted to make sure you got home safe today. We'll be here every day this week if that's okay with you. She stared at the screen. Then she took his phone and typed. Why? He typed back. Because the people who planned the attack yesterday, we found out this morning they know who you are. They know it was you who warned us. We're not sure yet what that means, but Grayson doesn't take chances. The world went very still. She read the message again. They know who you are. She handed the phone back and looked at him, and she signed, automatically forgetting for a second that he didn't know ASL, and then caught herself and reached for her notebook. How do they know who I am? He typed, we don't know exactly. Could be cameras near the warehouse. Could be someone in town who saw you running. Working on it. But until we know more, we're not leaving you alone. She looked at the 6 men standing in the school pickup area. She looked at Danny. She wrote, I don't want to be a burden. He read that and his face did something, tightened slightly, then relaxed, the way someone's face moves when they've decided to say something honest. He typed carefully, you ran 2 miles in 100-degree heat to save people you didn't know. You don't get to call yourself a burden. That's not how this works. Was reading over her shoulder. She felt Maya's hand squeeze her arm once, hard. Evelyn looked at Danny's message for a moment longer. She wrote, okay, just that. Okay, he nodded. He walked back to the others, and 6 men on motorcycles followed Evelyn Carter and her best friend the 3 blocks to Maya's car, at a respectful distance, steady and quiet as a held breath. The call came that evening. Evelyn didn't hear it. She never heard calls. But her phone lit up on the table beside her, charged now, and her mother came into her room with an expression that was harder to read than usual. She signed, it's Grayson Cole. He wants to speak with both of us. I have him on speaker. He knows you can't hear. He said to read my signing. They sat together on Evelyn's bed, her mother holding the phone between them, and Evelyn watched her mother's face and hands as she relayed what Grayson was saying in real time, signing and listening simultaneously, the way only someone who had been doing it for years could manage. He says he wants to tell you directly what the investigation found today. Her mother's expression shifted. Evelyn watched it carefully. He says the 5 men who were at the warehouse, they were part of a larger criminal organization. Local. They came in from 2 states over. The attack yesterday wasn't random, and it wasn't just about the Red Hollow chapter. Mother paused, listening. He says, there were 3 other targets, 3 other chapters in 3 other towns, all planned for the same day, same time window. The plan was coordinated. Evelyn sat very still. He says her mother's signing slowed, finding each word carefully. He says the Red Hollow attack was supposed to be the first one. signal for the others to go. She understood before her mother finished. Because the Red Hollow attack didn't happen. Because you warned them in time. The other chapters got emergency word that something had gone wrong. The other attacks were called off. All of them. The room was very quiet in the way only Evelyn's rooms were ever quiet. Her mother's hands kept moving. He says, you didn't just save the Red Hollow chapter, Evelyn. He says you may have saved lives in 3 other states. Evelyn looked at her mother's hands. She looked at her face. She looked back at her hands. She signed. He doesn't know that for certain. Her mother relayed it, listened. Sign back. He says you're right. He doesn't know for certain. The timing, the fact that all 3 other attacks were called off within minutes of Red Hollow not going as planned, he says it's not a coincidence. He says the investigators think the same. Evelyn got up from the bed. She walked to the window. She stood there with her back to the room for a moment, looking out at the darkening street. She turned around. Her mother was watching her. The phone was still in her hands. Her mother's face was doing that thing again. The compressed, overwhelmed thing, but bigger now, fuller, out of room for itself. Evelyn signed, tell him I'm glad it worked out. Her mother's lips curved. She said something into the phone. Then she signed back. He says he needs to meet with you and your mother in person. He says there's something he needs to discuss. Something about your situation. Owen frowned slightly. My situation? He says he'll explain when he sees you. He says soon tomorrow if possible. Evelyn looked at her mother. Her mother looked at her. She was. Something passed between them, the particular kind of communication that lives below language, below signs, in the shared space of people who know each other very well. Her signed. What do you want to do? Evelyn didn't hesitate. Tell him yes. They met at a diner on the edge of town the next morning. Mason came with 2 other men she recognized, one of them from the clubhouse, an older man whose name she learned was Carver, and a woman she hadn't seen before and who turned out to be a lawyer. Evelyn sat across from them with her mother beside her and her notebook in front of her. First 20 minutes they did the careful work of communicating across the gap. Grayson writing, Evelyn writing, her mother relaying. The rhythm of it establishing itself, which gradually, till it stopped feeling awkward and started feeling like a language they were all learning together. Wrote, I want to be direct with you about why I asked you here. She wrote, please. He wrote, we found out more about the people behind the attack. Organization has people in this town, not the 5 men from the warehouse. Those are in federal custody. Are people connected to this organization who live in Red Hollow, and some of them know who you are. The police know this too. They're working on it. But until those connections are fully identified and addressed, there's a security concern around you specifically. Her mother had stopped eating. Her coffee was getting cold. Evelyn wrote, what kind of security concern? He wrote, the people who organized the attack are not the forgiving type. Someone stopped their plan. That person is you. We don't know yet if they're willing to act on that, but we're not willing to assume they won't. She looked at that for a long moment. She wrote, you're saying I might be in danger. He wrote, I'm saying I don't know, but I'm not willing to treat it as impossible. And that's not something I can be comfortable with. She wrote, what are you proposing? He slid the notebook to the lawyer. The lawyer wrote, we'd like to discuss some options for your immediate situation. Nothing is being decided today, but your current home is in a neighborhood that is not easy to monitor or secure. We'd like to propose a temporary arrangement with your mother's full consent that would give you a safer immediate environment while the investigation proceeds. Evelyn looked at her mother. Her mother signed. They want to help us. That's what they're saying. I know. Evelyn signed back. What do you want to do? Her mother was quiet for a moment, not signing, not speaking, just sitting there with her hands in her lap, looking at the table. Then she looked up. Her eyes were bright in a way that wasn't sadness exactly, but was close to it, the brightness of someone who has been doing everything alone for a very long time and is suddenly being offered help and doesn't quite know how to process that. She signed to Evelyn, small and private. For once, I don't want to say no just because I'm proud. Evelyn reached across and covered her mother's hands with hers for a second. Then she turned back to Grayson and wrote, we want to hear the options. Boptas. The options turned out to be more substantial than she had expected. Not dramatic, this wasn't a movie, and Grayson was not the kind of man who operated in dramatic gestures. She was learning. Methodical. He laid out the options the way someone lays out a map. Here is where you are. Here is where you could go. Here are the distances between those points. There's a house 2 blocks from the clubhouse, owned by one of the chapter members. Currently empty, recently fixed up. Quiet street, easy to watch. Close enough to the clubhouse that any concern could be responded to in under 2 minutes. Offering it to Evelyn and her mother for, as long as necessary, no cost. There was also the lawyer mentioned carefully, the matter of school. The school Evelyn currently attended had no specialized support for deaf students, no interpreter on staff, no resources. The closest school that did was in Prescott, 40 minutes away, and they had already made inquiries, and there was a space available for the spring semester. Stared at that last part. She wrote, "You called a school in Prescott about me?" Mason wrote back, "We asked questions. We didn't make any decisions for you. That's yours to make." She looked at him. She looked at the word questions, which was careful and honest, and gave her nothing to push back against. She wrote, "Why are you doing all of this?" He took the notebook. He wrote for longer than he had written any single thing so far, and when he slid it back, she read it slowly, word by word. "Because you walked through our door when you didn't have to. You were terrified, I could see that. You didn't know us. You had every reason to keep running in the opposite direction. You made a choice based on what was right rather than what was safe. That's a rare thing. I've known men who've been in this club for 30 years who might not have made that same choice. Someone does something like that for you, for your people, you don't say thank you and walk away. That's not how we operate. You're under our protection now, and that means something. It will keep meaning something for as long as you need it to." Evelyn read it. She read it a second time. Then she passed it to her mother. Her mother read it and put it down and pressed one hand flat on the table and looked at the ceiling for a moment with those 2 bright eyes. Evelyn wrote, "I need a day to think." Grayson wrote, "Take what you need." She wrote, "I might have questions." He wrote, "I'll answer them." She looked at him across the table, this large, gray-haired, serious man who had built his authority not from noise, but from steadiness. And she thought about the note he had written her yesterday. First day. You were never invisible. People just weren't looking closely enough. She thought about the pretzels Danny had set down wordlessly beside her. She thought about Tyler's uncle texting from wherever he was to say she was family. She thought about what family meant when you were 16 and deaf and mostly invisible in the town where you'd grown up. She wrote one last thing before she put her notebook away. "Thank you for telling me the truth." He read it. He nodded once. They all ordered coffee and sat there a little longer, and the conversation moved into small tier, quieter things, and somehow that felt like the most significant part of all that they could sit there and talk about ordinary things, coffee and weather, and the diner's inexplicably good pie, as if the world had simply expanded to include all of them together, as naturally as breathing. But the quiet didn't last. It never does. Not in stories like this one, and not in lives like Evelyn Carter's. She had learned that lesson in the particular way that people learn things they wish weren't true, through repetition, through the specific exhaustion of hoping for stillness and getting motion instead. 2 days after the diner meeting, Danny called her mother's phone. He didn't write this time. Whatever he said, Evelyn read it in her mother's face as she stood in the kitchen holding the phone, and what her mother's face said was something bad. Her mother hung up and turned around and signed, precise and slow. "There was an incident at Maya's house last night. Someone left a message on her front door. Police are involved." "It's okay. She wasn't there. She was at her grandmother's." The message was. Her mother paused, resetting. "They know about Maya. They know she's your friend." Evelyn's hands dropped to her sides. "She's okay?" "She's okay. She's shaken, but she's okay." Evelyn picked up her phone, charged now, always charged. She would never let it die again, and typed to Maya. "Fast. I'm so sorry. This is because of me. Tell me what you need." Maya's response came back in less than a minute. "Stop it. Don't you dare apologize. I would do the same thing if I were you. We need to figure out what to do next." Evelyn stared at the message. Then she texted back, "I need to talk to Grayson." She was already dialing her mother's phone to have her make the call when another message came in from Maya. "I'm coming over. Don't argue." She almost smiled. She typed back, "Okay," and then she sat down on the kitchen floor, not gracefully, not intentionally, just suddenly because her legs decided the floor was the right place to be, and she held her phone in both hands and breathed through everything that was trying to happen at once. She had thought yesterday was the hard part. She was beginning to understand that yesterday was only the beginning. The people who had sent 5 armed men to destroy the Red Hollow chapter were not finished. They had regrouped, recalculated, and redirected. And they had decided that the 16-year-old deaf girl who had ruined their plan was worth their attention. That should have terrified her. And it did. Her hands were shaking again, that same fine trembling from 2 days ago, back without warning. But underneath the terror, something else was there. Something that hadn't been there before she ran 2 miles through desert heat toward a room full of strangers. Something that felt, if she pressed on it carefully and honestly, like anger. Not the small, quiet anger of someone who has been overlooked. Frustration she carried around most days like a second backpack, heavy and invisible. This was sharper. This was the anger of someone who had done the right thing and was being punished for it, and who had decided, somewhere in the 48 hours since she wrote those 7 words, that she was done letting other people decide what she was capable of. She pushed herself up off the kitchen floor. She walked to her room. She picked up her notebook, the same one, the one with the bent spine and the folded pages and the handwriting of people she now knew by name, and she opened it to a fresh page. She wrote 2 words, not done. She stared at them for a moment. Then she put the pen down and sat on the edge of her bed and waited for Maya and for whatever came next. And whatever came next, she had already decided one thing. She was not going to run away from it. Maya arrived 20 minutes after Evelyn's mother made the call to Grayson. She came through the front door with her backpack over one shoulder and a look on her face that Evelyn recognized immediately, that particular expression Maya got when she had decided something and was not going to be argued out of it. Her eyes were red at the edges, not from crying but from not sleeping, which for Maya was actually worse. Maya cried easily and recovered fast. When Maya didn't sleep, it meant something was sitting on her chest that she couldn't put down. She signed before she even got through the door. Before you say anything, I'm not scared, and I'm not blaming you. And if you apologize one more time, I will personally throw your notebook out the window. Evelyn looked at her. I wasn't going to apologize, she signed, thinking about it. She had been thinking about it. She didn't deny it. Maya sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out her own phone and placed it face up between them like it was evidence. She had screenshots, several of them. She had been awake until 2 in the morning, doing what Maya always did when she was frightened, researching, cataloging, building a picture out of pieces until it made sense. Look at this, she signed, and Evelyn leaned over to read the screen. It was a news article, local news from the Prescott Courier, dated that morning. Headline read, Federal investigation expands. Following foiled attack on motorcycle club. The article was short on specific details. Federal investigations usually were, but the key information was there. 5 men in federal custody, a coordinated multi-state operation that had failed. And buried in the 4th paragraph, a single sentence that made Evelyn's chest tighten. Investigators believe the failure of the primary target operation was the result of an anonymous tip that allowed the intended victims to prepare and contact law enforcement in advance. Anonymous. They were calling her Anonymous. She looked up at Maya. They didn't use my name. No, Maya signed. But that article has been shared 400 times this morning, and some of the comments she scrolled to the comment section, and Evelyn saw it before Maya could stop her. So the comments were ordinary shock, curiosity, the usual noise. But there were 3 near the top that were different, short, specific. One of them read, we know it wasn't anonymous. Evelyn sat back. Her mother had come into the kitchen at some point and was standing near the counter reading over Evelyn's shoulder. She reached past Evelyn and turned the phone face down on the table. She signed, Grayson is coming here. He'll be here in 10 minutes. Until then, we don't look at comment sections. It was the most decisive thing her mother had said in as long as Evelyn could remember. She looked at her mother's face and saw something there she hadn't seen in a while. Not the exhausted, holding it together look, not the careful, love wrapped in worry look. Something harder, something that had been sleeping for a few years and had woken up overnight. Mother was angry, quietly, completely, and productively angry. Evelyn recognized it because she felt the same thing. Grayson came with Danny and Carver and one other man. She hadn't met a broad-shouldered man named Marcus who turned out to be a former law enforcement officer, now private security, who worked with the chapter on exactly this kind of situation. He came in and sat down, and he didn't waste anyone's time with small talk. He wrote immediately, here's what we know as of this morning. The organization behind the attack has identified you. We believe they got your name from a traffic camera near the warehouse that caught you on the street. They have people who do that kind of work, image lookup, local records. It's not sophisticated, but it's effective. Evelyn wrote, "What do they want?" He wrote, "Honestly, we don't know exactly. This organization doesn't typically go after civilians, but they also don't typically have their operations collapsed by a teenager on her way home from school. A new territory here." She wrote, "That's not reassuring." He wrote, and she could see the corner of his mouth shift slightly as he did it. The closest thing to dark humor she had seen from him. "I know." And he was. "I'm telling you the truth instead of something comfortable." And that? She read it. She nodded. He continued, "Marcus is going to be present in this neighborhood starting today. Not visibly, he won't be sitting outside your door, but he'll be close. The police also have a patrol assigned to this block, which they arranged through the federal investigation. You are, as of this week, of an active federal case, which means you have a level of protection attached to that status." Evelyn's mother signed to her, "They're taking this seriously." "I can see that." Evelyn signed back. She turned back to Grayson and wrote, "What about Maya?" He nodded like he expected that. He wrote, "Maya's family has been contacted. Father spoke with Marcus this morning. We're watching their house too." She wrote, "She doesn't deserve to be involved in this." He wrote, "She's involved because she matters to you and you matter to us. That means she matters to us. That's how this works." She stared at that sentence. That's how this works. 4 words that described an entire system of loyalty she had never been inside before. She had grown up understanding loyalty as something fragile, as something that bent under pressure, that had limits, that came with asterisks and exhaustion. The loyalty of people who loved you but had run out of resources. The loyalty of people who meant well but couldn't sustain it. This was different. This felt structural, like something built from something solid. She wrote, "I want to know everything the investigation has found. Not a summary. Everything you can legally tell me." Mason looked at that request for a moment. Then he looked at Marcus. Marcus leaned forward and took the notebook. He wrote for a long time. What Marcus wrote took her 20 minutes to read through fully, because she read it twice and because some of it needed time to process. The organization, he didn't name them in writing, and she understood why had been operating in the Southwest for 11 years. A motorcycle club, and they weren't a street gang. They were something in between and around both of those things. Something that used legitimate businesses as cover and operated in the gaps between jurisdictions, in the spaces where one agency's authority ended and another's hadn't quite started. They had been under federal surveillance for 2 years. The coordinated attacks on the 4 Hells Angels chapters had been planned for 6 months. The Red Hollow attack was supposed to send a message. The chapter had apparently been an obstacle to some aspect of their operation in the region. She didn't have enough context to understand exactly what, and Marcus didn't provide it, and the message was going to be definitive. Instead, a 16-year-old girl on her way home from school had walked past the warehouse at exactly the wrong moment for them, and exactly the right moment for everyone else. She read that part again. Exactly the right moment. She hadn't thought of it that way. She had thought of it as accident, as proximity, as coincidence of geography. She walked that way every day. She walked it because it was quieter, because it gave her fewer faces to navigate, because the industrial road with its empty buildings and cracked sidewalks asked nothing of her. She walked it because she was tired, and the world was loud in its particular way, not loud with sound, but loud with demand, and the long way gave her less of that. She had walked that road for 3 years. On that one specific afternoon, 5 men had been there. She looked up from the notebook at Marcus, who was watching her, read with the patient steadiness of a man used to waiting. She wrote, "If I hadn't walked that way that day." She stopped, it out, start again, she wrote. "How close were they to being ready?" Wrote, "Based on the timetable, we've reconstructed approximately 12 minutes. 12 minutes. She set the notebook down and looked at her hands again. The steady hands. The hands that had written 7 words in less than 10 seconds, because there was no time for more. 12 minutes. If she had taken a different road, phone had been charged and she'd had her headphones in and hadn't been paying attention to her surroundings. If she had seen the men and made the other choice, the sensible choice, the self-preserving choice, and kept walking. 12 minutes, and everything would have gone differently. She picked the notebook back up. She wrote, "Does the federal investigation know that I was the anonymous tip?" Wrote, "Yes." They know your name is protected within the investigation, but they know who you are and what you did. She wrote, do they need anything else from me? He wrote, possibly. An agent may reach out through the local police. Nothing yet. She wrote one last thing. Then what do we do right now today? Grayson reached over and took the notebook back from Marcus. He wrote, right now today, you let us do our job. You go about your life as normally as you can. You tell us immediately if anything feels wrong. And you trust that you are not in this alone. She read it. She breathed. Then she signed to Maya, who had been sitting beside her reading everything over her shoulder with increasing expressions of barely contained intensity. You need to stay with your grandmother for a while. Maya signed immediately back, no. Maya, no, absolutely not. You don't get to protect me by sending me away. That's not how we work. This is different. Why? Because these people left a message on your front door. Maya's signing slowed. Not because she was less certain. Evelyn could read that she was exactly as certain as she'd been 10 seconds ago, but because she wanted to be precise. Evelyn, listen to me. Those people already know I'm your friend. Sending me to my grandmother's doesn't make me safer. It just makes you more alone. And you being alone is exactly what they want. Evelyn stared at her, stared back. Neither of them signed anything for a full 5 seconds. Then Evelyn turned to Grayson and wrote, is she right? Does sending her away make her safer? Grayson read it. He looked at Marcus. Something passed between them. He wrote, honestly, not significantly. Visibility is protective in situations like this. She's safer where we can watch her than somewhere we can't. Evelyn turned back to Maya. Maya signed, I told you. Evelyn signed back. Don't look so pleased about it. Maya looked pleased about it. The next 3 days were the strangest of Evelyn's life, and her life had recently become a place where strange things happened at an accelerated rate. She went to school, she came home, she ate meals. She did homework badly because her concentration was fractured into about 16 different pieces, but she did it. She slept, though not well, waking at 3 and 4 in the morning with the ceiling above her and the silence around her, and her mind going through every detail of every day like it was building a case. Danny or Marcus or someone from the chapter was always somewhere nearby. She never had to look hard to find them, and she never had to ask them to be there. Just there. The way a support structure is there, not visible until you need it, but solid. The afternoon, something changed. She felt it before she understood it. She was sitting in her kitchen after school, working on a history essay that she didn't care about at all, when her mother came in from outside with an expression that was hard to parse. Not frightened, not worried, something different, something suspended between shock and something else she couldn't immediately name. She signed, you need to come outside. Evelyn put down her pen. She went outside. There were motorcycles, not 6, 10. Not 10. She stood on the front step and looked up and down the street. And what she saw was motorcycles as far as she could see in both directions parked along the curb in the middle of the road around the corner. Men and women in vests, standing or sitting, talking to each other and to neighbors, some of them on phones. The sound of it, the vibration of it, which she felt through the step and through the soles of her shoes, was steady and massive and continuous. She turned to her mother. What is this? Her mother's eyes were too bright again. She signed, they started arriving this morning. Word spread through the chapters. What you did, about the coordinated attack, about the fact that you stopped it alone. She paused. Grayson didn't organize this. They just came. Evelyn stood there. Danny appeared from somewhere nearby. He walked up to her and held out his phone. The screen showed a number, 247. She looked at him. He shrugged in a way that communicated something she understood without a single word, that this was still growing, that he wasn't sure what the final number would be, that even he hadn't expected this. She typed on his phone, why? He took the phone and typed back, because what you did for our people, some of these guys have brothers in the chapters that were going to be hit that day. You stopped it. You stopped all of it. And they wanted you to know. They know that. She gave the phone back. She looked at the street full of motorcycles. She was 16 years old and she had grown up invisible in this town. And the street outside her house was filled with nearly 300 people who had driven from other states to stand here. Not for revenge, for her. She sat down on the front step because her legs had made an executive decision about what her body was going to do next. And her mother sat down beside her. And they sat there together, looking at the street, and neither of them signed anything for a while because there was nothing to sign that was equal to what they were seeing. Arrived an hour later. He came through the crowd the way water moves through stone, not forcefully, just inevitably, people shifting aside because he was moving and then returning to where they'd been. He sat down on the front step below, where Evelyn and her mother were sitting, which she noticed he chose the lower position deliberately. She thought, so she wasn't looking up at him. He wrote, "I want to be honest with you, I didn't call them." She wrote, "I know, Danny told me." He wrote, "Word moved through the network the way it does with things that matter. People wanted to come. I didn't stop them because I didn't think I should. I want you to know that this isn't pressure. Nobody out there expects anything from you. They just wanted to be here." She looked at him. She wrote, "How many?" He checked his phone. He held it up. The number on the screen was 312. She absorbed that. She wrote, "You said nearly 500 by this evening." She wrote, "From where?" He wrote, "California, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, 2 from Colorado, 3 from Utah," and then wrote, "1 from Montana. That's a long drive." She stared at 1 from Montana. One person had driven from Montana to stand on her street. Person she had never met, who had no direct connection to her, who had gotten word through whatever network carried these things and had decided that this mattered enough to get in a car or on a bike and drive however many hours it took to get to Red Hollow, Arizona. She wrote, "I don't know what to do with this." He wrote, "You don't have to do anything with it." She looked at the street. She wrote, "Can I meet them?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he wrote, "If you want to." "Nobody expects it." She wrote, "I want to." What happened over the next 2 hours was something she would spend years trying to describe to people who weren't there and would always feel like she had fallen short. She walked out into the street with her notebook and Grayson at her side, and she met people, one by one in pairs, in small groups. Most of them knew she was deaf word, had traveled with the story, and they found ways to communicate. Held up with typed messages. Notes passed. Some of them knew a sign or two. Thank you was the most common. The hand touched to the lips and moved forward, and she saw it again and again, and each time it hit her somewhere new, because it was always sincere, never performed. These were not people given to performance. They were people given to directness. A man from California, tall, silver-haired, a scar running along his jawline that he'd probably had for decades, handed her a piece of paper he had clearly been carrying folded in his vest pocket for some time. She unfolded it and read, "My little brother was in the Flagstaff chapter. The 3 that called off the attack because Red Hollow went wrong. He has 2 kids. I drove 11 hours to shake your hand." She looked up at him. He held out his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief, and when he let go, he nodded once and walked back into the crowd, and she stood there with the folded paper in her hand and thought, 2 kids. 2 kids somewhere who still had their father. Because she had taken the long way home on a Tuesday. A woman, one of the few women in vests, with short gray hair and sharp blue eyes, came up to her and typed on her phone, "I run the women's auxiliary of 3 chapters in Nevada. You did is going to be told at every meeting we have for the next 10 years. I want you to know that." She typed back, "I hope they get the details right." She smiled, a real one, sharp and warm at once. She typed, "I'll make sure of it." A young man, maybe 22, nervous in a way he was trying not to show, stopped her and took so long to find what he wanted to say on his phone that she almost touched his arm to tell him it was okay. Take his time. He held up the screen. "I'm sorry this put you in danger. You shouldn't have to be afraid because you did the right thing. That's not okay. We know that." She read it 3 times. Nobody had said that exact thing to her yet. People had said thank you and brave and proud and family, and she had received all of those things and they had mattered. But this was different. This was someone acknowledging specifically, directly, that the situation was not fair, that doing the right thing had cost her something, was still costing her something, and that he saw that and it bothered him. She typed back, "Thank you for saying that. It helps more than you know." He nodded and stepped back, and she moved on, and behind her the street hummed with the vibration of hundreds of engines that weren't running, hundreds of people who had come to a small desert town for one specific reason. Late in the afternoon, something happened that nobody had planned. One of the chapter members, she didn't know his name, had apparently gone to pick up food for some of the people who had come a long distance and had nothing to eat. He came back with about 40 bags from the barbecue place on Main Street, and somehow word moved through the crowd, and people started gathering, and somebody found folding tables from somewhere And within 30 minutes, there was what could only be described as an impromptu block party on Evelyn Carter's street. Neighbors who had been watching from their porches started coming out. Cautiously, Red Hollow was a town of direct people, for all its complications, but curiously, and then genuinely. People Evelyn had lived down the street from for years, but never really spoken to, started appearing in the mix, eating barbecue, and talking to bikers from California and Nevada and Montana. Conversations she watched from her position near the table were varied and real and occasionally funny in ways she could catch from across the space. Was talking to a woman from the Arizona chapter who turned out to have a daughter Evelyn's age, also deaf, who attended the school in Prescott that had already been mentioned at the diner meeting. She watched her mother's face during this conversation, watched it move from polite interest to something more genuine, more searching. Maya had shown up at a point, of course. She had positioned herself near Evelyn with a plate of food and an expression of uncontained wonder that she wasn't trying to contain at all. She signed. Are you seeing this? Evelyn signed. I'm seeing it. This is your street, Ev. These people are here for you. I know. Does it feel real yet? Evelyn looked around at the tables and the people and her mother talking to a woman she'd never met. At Danny laughing at something with a teenager from the neighborhood who 2 weeks ago would never have crossed paths with him. At the man from California standing near the corner with his arms crossed, a look on his face that was peaceful in the way of someone who has completed something. Not entirely, she signed honestly, but it's getting there. The twist came at 7:37 in the evening. She knew the time exactly because she checked it a few minutes before, and it fixed itself in her memory the way times fix themselves when something important is about to happen. Mason found her in the crowd and wrote on his phone, "There's something you need to know. I've been sitting on this most of the afternoon because I wanted to find the right moment. I don't think there is a right moment, so I'm telling you now." She took the phone and typed, "Tell me." He took it back. He typed for a long time. She waited. He gave her the phone. "The federal investigation made an arrest this morning. Not one of the 5 from the warehouse, they're already in custody." This was a different arrest. Someone inside the organization who had been providing local intelligence. Someone who had helped identify you by name after the attack failed. "The agent in charge called me 2 hours ago because they knew I was in contact with you. They wanted me to pass this on." She typed, "Who was arrested?" He took the phone. He typed one line and gave it back. She read it. She read it again. She looked up at Grayson. His face was doing the thing her mother's face sometimes did, that compressed, controlled look of someone carrying something heavy and deciding how to put it down carefully. The name on the phone was not a stranger's name. It was the name of a man she knew. Not well, she had never had a conversation with him, had never been in the same room with him intentionally, but she knew the name. She had seen it on a mailbox. She had seen it on a truck, parked in a driveway, 3 streets over from where she lived. He was a neighbor, had been a neighbor for at least 4 years. He was the one who had identified her. He was the one who had told them her name. The phone shook slightly in her hand, or her hand was shaking. She couldn't tell which. She typed, "He lives 3 streets from me." Mason took the phone, typed lived. "He's in federal custody." She typed, "How long was he working for them?" "Grayson, they don't know yet." "At least 2 years. He knew who I was for 4 years, and he waited until I did this one thing." Mason, "Yes." She stared at the screen. She typed, "Is my mother safe? Is our house safe now?" Mason, "Safer." This was the primary local contact. The investigation believes removing him significantly reduces the immediate threat, not declaring it over. These things are never declared over quickly, but yes, risk level has dropped considerably. She looked around at the street full of people who had come from other states. She looked at her house, 3 streets from a man who had known her name and given it to people who wanted to use it against her. She looked at the folded piece of paper in her pocket. From the man with the silver hair and the scar. He has 2 kids. She typed one last thing. Did he know what they were planning to do with the attack? A long pause. Grayson typing and deleting and typing again. She could see it in the typing indicator. Finally, the investigation believes he did. She put the phone in her pocket. She stood in the middle of her street, surrounded by nearly 500 people, and she breathed. In her chest, everything was moving at once, relief and anger, and something that was not quite grief but was adjacent to it, the particular ache of discovering that danger had been living 3 streets away wearing an ordinary face. She thought about all the times she had walked past that truck in that driveway, all the times she had taken the long way home and passed the streets where this man lived, this man who was moving information to people who planned violence, this man who had looked at a photograph from a traffic camera and put a name to a face and made a 16-year-old girl into a target. She thought about all the things she couldn't hear, and she thought about all the things she had seen anyway. Maya appeared at her elbow. She had clearly been watching Evelyn's face for the past several minutes and had correctly identified that something significant had happened. She signed. What is it? Evelyn signed. They made an arrest. Someone local. Someone who gave them my name. Maya's hands stilled. Evelyn told her. Maya's face went through several things. Then she signed. He lives 3 streets away. He lived 3 streets away. Odd. Maya pressed her hands flat against her thighs for a moment, her version of regrouping. Then she looked at Evelyn directly. How are you? Evelyn thought about it. She thought about it honestly, rather than reaching for the easy answer. I don't know yet, she signed. But I think I'm going to be okay. Studied her face. Then she signed, I think so too. And then because Maya had known her since 4th grade and knew exactly when to pivot and when to hold, she signed. There's a guy over there from Nevada who just told me the barbecue here is better than anywhere he's been in 3 states. I think Red Hollow is about to be famous for something good. Evelyn looked at her. She signed. That might be the best thing that's happened all week. And somehow standing in the middle of 500 people on her street with an arrest warrant filed 3 streets away and a notebook full of other people's handwriting in her backpack, she meant it. After the street filled with motorcycles, Red Hollow was quiet again. Not the quiet of before, not the ordinary, indifferent quiet of a small desert town that had never paid much attention to Evelyn Carter. This was a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes after something large has moved through a space and left its shape behind. The air felt different. The street looked the same but wasn't. Things had happened here that couldn't be unhappened, and the town knew it, even if it couldn't articulate exactly what it knew. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with her. Coffee. She had started drinking coffee the week after everything began, not because she particularly liked it, but because the ritual of it helped. The warmth of the mug between her palms, the simple physical anchor of something ordinary, and she read through the notebook from the beginning. Was all of it, every page. Her own handwriting and other people's handwriting, back and forth like a conversation that had started in panic and somewhere along the way had become something else entirely. She read Grayson's careful, deliberate sentences. She read Danny's typed messages that she had copied down longhand. She read the man from California's folded note. She read the 7 words she had written in the Hells Angels clubhouse with shaking hands on the worst and best afternoon of her life. Armed men, outside, they are coming for you. She had written those words in terror. She had written them because there was nothing else to write, because the situation had compressed itself down to the smallest possible unit of communication, and she had found it. 7 words, the whole thing in 7 words. She closed the notebook. Her mother came in from the hallway and signed, How did you sleep? Evelyn signed back, which was true. Not well. She didn't think she was going to sleep well for a while yet, but better. The arrest the night before had done something to the quality of the fear that had been sitting in her chest since Danny had told her they knew her name. Not removed it, shifted it, made it smaller and less immediate, like turning down a volume that she couldn't hear but could feel. Her mother sat down across from her and poured her own coffee. And they sat together for a moment, the way they had started sitting together more often this week. Not because things were resolved. Proximity had become its own kind of communication. Mother signed. Grayson called this morning. Early. You were up. Evelyn set her mug down. What did he say? He said the federal agent wants to meet with you. Officially. He said it's not about danger. The threat assessment has been downgraded significantly since last night's arrest. It's about your testimony. What you saw at the warehouse. They want it on the record in a way that will hold up in a federal case. Evelyn absorbed that when. He said this week, if possible. He said they'll come to you. You don't have to go anywhere. Did he say anything else? Her mother's hands paused for a moment in the particular way they paused when she was deciding how to present something. Evelyn had learned to read that pause the same way she read everything else through attention, through knowing the person, through all the nonverbal information that lived around the edges of language. She signed. He said, there's something else he wants to discuss with you after the federal meeting. Something separate. He said it's not urgent, but it's important. Evelyn looked at her mother. Did he say what? No. He sounded her mother's search for the sign. Then fingers spelled the word instead, deliberate, like he'd been thinking about it for a while. Evelyn picked up her coffee. She looked at the notebook on the table. And she had learned, on all means, in the past week, that when Grayson Cole described something as important was worth taking seriously. The federal agent's name was Torres, and she arrived on Wednesday afternoon with a partner named Briggs and a small digital recorder and the kind of professional efficiency that Evelyn had learned to read as respect rather than coldness. Torres had clearly been briefed on the communication situation before she arrived. She brought a certified ASL interpreter, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who signed with the clean precision of someone who had done courtroom interpretation for years. They sat in the living room. Evelyn's mother was present. Mason was present, off to the side, not participating, just there in the way he was always just there, steady, unobtrusive, like a wall that happened to also be a person. Interpreted Torres's questions and Evelyn's answers in both directions with a smoothness that made the conversation feel almost normal, almost like any other conversation, which was a gift Evelyn didn't take for granted. Torres asked her to walk through everything she had seen at the warehouse, every detail, starting from the moment she noticed the men. Evelyn walked through it. She was precise. She had always been precise. Precision was another thing that came with the trade, with the particular way she experienced the world. You can't hear, you remember what you see, because what you see is everything. She described the position of each man. She described the rifle, its length, its color, the way it was held. She described the map or a diagram on the barrel. She described the binoculars, the direction they were pointed, the specific building at the end of the road. She described the man who checked his watch. Torres asked, "How long did you observe them before you made the decision to run?" Asha signed the question. Evelyn thought about it honestly. She signed maybe 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. Not long. I knew almost immediately what I was seeing. Torres nodded, making a note. How did you know? Evelyn considered the question. She signed, I watch people very carefully. I have my whole life. When you can't hear what someone is saying, you learn to read what they're doing. Those men were doing things that only meant one thing. As looked at her for a moment. After Patricia finished interpreting, she said, and Patricia signed it faithfully. You have an extraordinary observational capacity. Evelyn signed back. I have a necessary one. Something shifted slightly in Torres's expression. She made another note. The interview lasted an hour and 40 minutes. At the end, Torres asked one final question. Is there anything you saw that you haven't told us yet? Anything that seemed small or insignificant at the time? Evelyn thought about it. She had been thorough. She had covered everything she could access in her memory, which was considerable. She sat with the question for a moment because it deserved a real answer rather than a quick one. And then she remembered something. Something she had seen and cataloged and then filed away because everything else had crowded it out. She signed. One of the men, the one with the map, he had something on his wrist. Not a watch, a tattoo. I noticed it because it was the inside of the wrist, which is an unusual place. It was small, dark ink. It looked like 2 letters, but I couldn't read them clearly from that distance. I went very still. Briggs, who had been largely silent through the entire interview, leaned forward. Torres said, "Can you describe the shape of the letters, even approximately?" Patricia signed the question. Evelyn signed back. One of them might have been a V. The other was curved, like a C or a G. They were close together, like an abbreviation. Torres and Briggs looked at each other. It was a short look, professional. But Evelyn had been reading faces her whole life. That look meant something. Torres said, "Thank you, Evelyn." She paused, and the pause was genuine, not procedural. This has been extraordinarily helpful. After they left, Grayson moved from the wall where he'd been standing. He wrote on his phone and showed it to Evelyn, what you just described. The tattoo. I saw their faces when you said it. She typed back, it meant something to them. He typed, yes, I think it did. She typed, do you know what? He typed, I have a guess. I'm not going to share it until I'm sure. If I'm right, what you just gave them is bigger than the warehouse. He paused, then added, you might have just handed them a thread that unravels the whole thing. She stared at that. I almost didn't say it. I thought it was too small. He typed back, immediately, nothing you observe is too small. Remember that. The important thing Grayson wanted to discuss came 3 days later. He came alone, which was unusual. In the 10 days she had known him, he had rarely arrived anywhere without at least one other person from the chapter. He came in the late afternoon, when the desert light was going gold, and her mother was home from work, and he sat at the kitchen table with his notebook, and he wrote, without preamble, which she had come to recognize as his version of taking a deep breath. I want to talk to you about school. She wrote, Prescott. He wrote, yes, I know we mentioned it at the diner. I want to revisit it more seriously now that the immediate situation has stabilized. Because we're pressuring you. Because I think you deserve to hear the full picture. She wrote, tell me. He wrote, the school in Prescott has a full program for deaf students. Certified interpreters in every classroom. ASL is accredited language. A teacher who specializes in work with deaf students who are academically advanced, and you are academically advanced, in case nobody has told you that clearly enough. They have a student there who has been accepted to 3 universities on a full academic scholarship. She's been deaf since age 4. Evelyn read that. She wrote, why are you telling me about her specifically? He wrote, because I spoke to her mother, because I wanted to know what the school actually did, not just what the brochure said. And her mother told me that before that school, her daughter was exactly where you are, invisible to the people who were supposed to be educating her. And after he paused, wrote the next word carefully, possible. Evelyn sat with that word, possible, she wrote. What about my mother? Her job is here. This house is here, he wrote. The house 2 blocks from the clubhouse, the offer still stands. 40 minutes from Prescott. Your mother would have to drive, or you'd need to board during the week, which the school has accommodation for. Not a perfect solution, but it's a real one. She wrote, why do you care this much about my education? He took the notebook. He wrote for longer than usual, and when he slid it back, she leaned forward to read every word. Because I have a daughter. She's 24 now, and she lives in Denver, and she calls me every Sunday, and she is the best thing I have ever done with my life. She was 16. She was in a situation not entirely unlike yours. Different circumstances, same basic shape. Somebody overlooked her. Somebody decided her limitations were more important than her capabilities. And it took someone outside her immediate situation to say, this is not acceptable. And here is a different option. I was not that person for her. I was too deep in my own life. I regret that. Evelyn read that paragraph twice. She wrote, what happened to her? He wrote, she figured it out herself eventually. But it took years she shouldn't have had to spend figuring. Years she could have been building instead. She wrote, and you don't want that for me. I don't want that for you. She looked at him. He looked at her. The kitchen was quiet in the way kitchens are quiet on late afternoons, that particular domestic silence that is different from all other silences, weighted with the ordinary business of living. She wrote, can I think about it? He wrote, take as long as you need. You keep saying that. He wrote, because I keep meaning it. She thought about it for 4 days. She thought about it alone, and she thought about it with Maya, and she thought about it in the long stretches of 3 in the morning when she was awake and the house was still. She thought about what it would mean to leave Red Hollow, which she had mostly wanted to leave for most of her life, and discovered that the wanting to leave and the actual leaving were emotionally very different things. She thought about her mother driving 40 minutes in the dark and about what it would feel like to be in a classroom where someone signed her questions at her and she could answer without a notebook. She thought about the word possible and what it would mean to be in a place that meant it. On the 4th day, she asked her mother a direct question. She signed, what do you want? Her mother looked at her. She signed back, I want what's right for you. That's not what I asked. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she signed, slowly, I want you to go to a school where you're not an afterthought. He was. I've wanted that since you were 6 years old, and your first teacher didn't know a single sign and looked at me like I'd asked for something unreasonable when I requested an interpreter. She stopped, started again. I've been fighting that fight for 10 years and losing it every year. A school that doesn't make us fight that fight, yes. That. Even if it's complicated. Even if it means figuring out the 40 minutes. Evelyn looked at her mother's hands. She thought about the 10 years her mother had spent going to meetings and writing letters and making phone calls and absorbing the particular exhaustion of advocating in systems that didn't want to be moved. She signed, why didn't you tell me how hard it was? Her mother signed, because you had enough to carry. That sentence hit her somewhere behind the sternum. She sat with it for a moment, then she signed, we'll figure out the 40 minutes. Her mother's face did the thing. The compressed, overwhelmed thing. But this time it broke through. She pressed one hand to her mouth and her eyes went wet, and she sat there for a second, being a person who was feeling too many things at once, which Evelyn recognized because she had been that person every day for the past 2 weeks. She reached across the table and covered her mother's hand with hers. They sat like that. The decision was made, and neither of them had to say another word about it. She told Grayson the next morning, yes, to Prescott, to the house, to figuring out the 40 minutes. He read it, he wrote one word back, good. She wrote, I have conditions. He wrote, name them. She wrote, my mother makes her own decisions about the job in the house. Nobody pressures her. Nobody makes her feel like she owes anyone anything. Agreed, she wrote. Maya stays in my life exactly as she is. I don't disappear into a new situation and leave her behind. Agreed, she wrote. I'm not a project, I'm not a symbol. I'm not the deaf girl you rescued. I'm Evelyn Carter and I make my own choices. And I need the people around me to remember that. She slid the notebook across. She watched him read it. She watched his face. He wrote, agreed. And for the record, I have never once thought of you as a symbol or a project. I think of you as someone who did something remarkable and deserves a life that reflects that. And those are very different things, she wrote. I know. I needed to say it out loud anyway. He wrote, good. Say things out loud, it's important. She almost smiled. She wrote, you know what I mean? He wrote, I do. And then after a pause, one more thing. The chapter wants to do something for you. Formally. Not a party, not a crowd. Something small and specific. I'd like your permission. She wrote, what kind of something? He wrote, I'll show you when the time is right. I just need to know you'll let us. She looked at him for a moment. Then she wrote, okay. He nodded. He closed the notebook and stood up. And then he paused and wrote one last thing standing at the table. Leaning over, thank you for trusting us. She read it. She looked up at him. She signed, not wrote, signed thank you the way she had seen 300 people sign it to her on her street a week ago. The hand touching the lips and moving forward, a gesture she had used her whole life and had never felt quite like this before, quite this full. He didn't know ASL, but he recognized the sign. She saw it register on his face. He had clearly looked it up, or someone had shown him because he didn't look uncertain. He just nodded once, and his jaw shifted slightly in the way she had learned was the equivalent of someone else clearing their throat to cover emotion. He left. She sat alone in the kitchen with the notebook and the cooling, coffee, and the decision that was now made, and she felt something she didn't have an immediate name for. Something that wasn't happiness exactly and wasn't relief exactly. Something that lived between those two things and was larger than either of them. Something that felt like the first day of something rather than the last day of something, which was different from how most things in her life had felt. She opened the notebook to a fresh page. She wrote 2 words again, the same 2 she had written after Maya had told her about the message on the front door. The same 2 she had written when everything felt dangerous and uncertain, and she needed something to hold on to. Not done. She looked at them. Then she crossed them out gently, the way you cross something out, not because it was wrong, but because it was complete. She wrote something new instead, just beginning. The thing Grayson had asked her permission for happened 2 weeks later on a Saturday afternoon. She came to the clubhouse. She had been back several times since that first night, and it no longer carried the physical shock of the unknown, but it still carried something, a particular weight of memory of what had happened there and what had started there. And when she walked through the door, the room was arranged differently than she had ever seen it. Regulars were there. Carver, Danny, Marcus, the man with the white beard whose name she had learned was Hector. Several others whose names she had gathered gradually over the weeks, faces she now recognized and that recognized her, which was still something she was getting used to. Her mother was there. Maya was there, standing near the wall with carefully controlled excitement that she was doing a bad job of controlling. Mason stood in the center of the room. He was holding something. She couldn't see what it was from the door. She walked in. The room did not go silent the way it had on the first night, that electric, uncertain silence of strangers. It went quiet, the way rooms go quiet when something is about to happen that everyone present has been looking forward to. Mason walked to meet her. He was holding a vest, not his own, not any of the ones she had seen before. This one was smaller, clearly made or modified for her, and on the back of it was a patch she had to step closer to read because her eyes went slightly wrong for a second from the feeling of what was happening. She stepped closer. She read it. 2 words and a symbol, a wing, she thought, or a stylized heart with something angular at its center. She wasn't sure, and she wasn't focusing on the symbol because she was focused on the words. In heart, she stood there. Grayson held it out to her. He wasn't writing anything. He wasn't typing. He was just holding it out and looking at her with those calm, serious eyes that had been the first thing she had trusted in that room. On that first night, because they were honest eyes, honest were something she had learned to identify in the same way. She had learned to identify everything else through attention, through necessity, through years of reading the world without sound. She took it. She turned it over in her hands. She looked at the patch. She looked at the stitching. Someone had done this carefully, deliberately, with attention. This was not a mass-produced thing. This was made. She looked up at Grayson. He spoke. She watched his lips, and she caught it this time, all clear enough to not need Patricia or paper or a phone screen. Either he spoke very deliberately, or she had gotten better at reading him over the weeks. Probably both. You didn't save us because you were fearless. You saved us because you cared. She looked at him. She looked at the room, at Danny with his neck tattoo and his pretzels and his typed messages. At Carver, who said little but whose presence said everything. At Hector, who had patted her hand like a grandfather. At Marcus, who had written her the truth when she needed it. At her mother, whose eyes were bright in the way they had been bright so many times this month, that particular brightness that kept almost but not quite becoming tears. At Maya, who had stopped pretending to control her expression and was simply standing there with everything she felt completely visible on her face. She put the vest on. It fit. Of course it fit. Grayson was not a man who did things without finding out the necessary details first. She stood in the Hells Angels clubhouse in Red Hollow, Arizona, wearing a vest with Guardian Heart on the back. And she felt the room, not heard it, felt it through the floor and through the air and through the particular electricity that moves between people when something real is happening between them. Danny started clapping first, then the others. She felt the vibration of it through the concrete. She didn't cry in the room. She cried later, in the parking lot, with Maya beside her, and the evening coming down around them, and the sound of the desert night that she had never heard but had always understood in her own way. Maya had her arm around her shoulders and signed anything for a while, which was exactly right. Then she signed, "How are you feeling?" Evelyn thought about it. She thought about the question honestly. She had been trying to think about everything honestly for the past month, and honesty was something she had decided to commit to more completely, in the same way she had committed to not letting her phone die again as a practical survival measure as much as anything else. She signed, like I've been seen, for the first time in a long time, in a way that's real. Not pitied, not accommodated, seen. Maya signed, "You've always been worth seeing." Evelyn signed, "I know that now." Maya pulled her closer for a second. Then she signed, "Can I say something without you rolling your eyes?" "Probably not, but go ahead. I always saw you." Evelyn looked at her. She signed, "I know you did. That's why I kept you." Maya laughed. She couldn't see it exactly, but she felt the movement of it through Maya's shoulder. She felt herself almost Law in the same way. The breath of it, the shape of it. They stood there in the parking lot until the evening settled into something cooler and darker, and the stars came out over Red Hollow, which was a desert sky thing, the kind of sky that only exists where there's no light pollution, dense and specific and very close. Evelyn tipped her head back and looked at it. She had lived under this sky her whole life and had never looked at it quite like this, like it was something that belonged to her too, like she was part of the landscape rather than just moving through it. 16 years of feeling like she was passing through her own life, and then 7 words on a notebook page had changed the direction of everything. The night before she and her mother were due to move to the house 2 blocks from the clubhouse, Evelyn did something she had not expected to do. She walked the long way home. Not from school, there was no school that day. Just from the coffee place on Main Street where she had been meeting Maya to say a proper "see you soon." The kind that wasn't a goodbye, because Maya had already announced she would be making the drive to Prescott every other weekend minimum, and Evelyn believed her because Maya did what she said she would do. She walked the long way because she needed to. She walked the industrial road past the empty buildings and the storage facility with the broken fence and the old auto shop with the plywood windows. She walked it at the same time of day she had walked it on that Tuesday, the same pale, bleached, too hot afternoon sky, the same cracked pavement. She walked past the warehouse. He was. There was no one there. Of course there was no one there. 5 men were in federal custody, and a sixth man was three streets away facing federal charges of his own. And the organization they had worked for was in the middle of being unraveled by a thread that a 16-year-old girl had pulled from a tattoo she had almost not mentioned. She stood in front of the warehouse and she looked at the spot where 5 men had stood with their weapons and their map and their binoculars pointed at a building full of people who had no idea. She had stood here almost here, a few feet to the left, and she had understood in 90 seconds what was about to happen, and she had made a choice. The road was empty. The afternoon was hot. Her phone was charged. She stood there for 1 full minute. She counted it. Approximate was superned. In the way she counted things without sound and rhythm, in the pulse she could feel in her temples. Then she turned around. She walked toward the other end of the road. Not running this time. Walking, steady and deliberate, the way she had learned to walk toward things she was afraid of, not fast, not slow, just continuous, 1 foot in front of the other, and committed. She walked past the place where the motorcycles had been parked. Past the door she had shoved open without knocking because there was no time for knocking. She didn't go in. There was no reason to go in today. And besides, she would be 2 blocks away starting tomorrow. Was the kind of proximity that made spontaneous visits possible rather than requiring deliberate journeys. She walked home the rest of the way, the short way, for the first time in as long as she could remember, and it felt different than she expected. Not smaller, not quicker, just clear. Like a road she hadn't needed to avoid in a while and had forgotten she didn't need to avoid. Her mother was in the kitchen, surrounded by boxes when she got home. She looked up when Evelyn came in and signed, "How was the walk?" Evelyn set her backpack down. She took out the notebook, the original one, the bent spine one, the one with everyone's handwriting in it, on the table. She signed, "Good." It was good. Her mother looked at the notebook. She looked at Evelyn. She signed, "Are you ready?" Evelyn looked around the kitchen, the bare walls where things had already been taken down, the window that showed the same street she had always looked out, the street that was now also the street where 500 people had stood for her. Signed, "Yes." Her mother nodded. She turned back to the boxes. And Evelyn Carter, 16 years old, deaf, guardian's heart, picked up a box and started carrying things toward whatever came next. The house, 2 blocks from the clubhouse, smelled like fresh paint and someone's deliberate care. Evelyn noticed that immediately, not the smell obviously, but the evidence of it. The walls were clean. The floors had been recently refinished. Someone had put curtains up in the kitchen window, plain white ones. Nothing fancy, but chosen and hung, which meant someone had stood in a store somewhere and thought about what this house needed, and then gone and gotten it. That kind of attention had a texture she had learned to read. It was different from obligation. It felt like welcome. Her mother walked through each room with the particular expression of someone trying not to let something mean too much in case it was taken away. Evelyn recognized that expression because she had worn it herself for most of her life. The preemptive emotional armor of people who had been disappointed enough times that hope felt dangerous. She watched her mother run one hand along the kitchen counter. She watched her mother stop at the window and look out. She watched her mother's shoulders, which she had never really studied before, as a specific object of observation, and saw them do something she hadn't seen them do in a long time: drop. Just slightly. The half-inch descent of muscle that has been holding something up for years and has been told by the situation that it can rest now. Evelyn set the box she was carrying on the floor. She walked over and stood beside her mother at the window. Her mother signed without looking at her, still looking out, "It's nice." Evelyn signed, "It's ours." Her mother turned. Her face was doing the thing, compressed thing that Evelyn had seen so many times in the past month. But this time it broke all the way through. Her mother pressed both hands to her own face and stood there for about 10 seconds. And Evelyn put her arms around her and held on. And her mother held on back. And they stood in the kitchen of a house they hadn't known existed a month ago and let themselves feel the full weight of what had changed. When her mother pulled back, she signed, "I have wanted something like this for so long. A place that felt safe, and I didn't know how to get here. I didn't know that getting here was even possible." Evelyn signed, "I didn't either." Her mother signed, "A warehouse, armed men, a dead phone." She shook her head slowly. Of all the ways for everything to change. Evelyn looked at her. She signed. I think it had to be something impossible. Because nothing small was going to move us. Her mother absorbed that. Then she signed. When did you get so wise? Evelyn signed. I've always been this wise. You just had too much on your mind to notice. Her mother laughed. Evelyn felt it, rather than heard it, the movement of her mother's chest, the shape of her face going open and warm. She hadn't made her mother laugh like that, genuinely, unguardedly, in longer than she could immediately calculate. It was a good sound to feel. The first week in the new house established its own rhythms faster than Evelyn expected. Danny came by on the second day to make sure everything was working, the plumbing, the heat, the internet, which had been set up before they arrived, which was another small evidence of someone thinking ahead. A bag of groceries that contained specific things, coffee, and her mother had mentioned once in passing in the diner, and a specific kind of chips that Evelyn had been eating from the bag he'd given her that first night in the clubhouse. He had remembered. She didn't comment on it. He didn't draw attention to it. She saw it and filed it where she filed all the things she saw. Mason came by on the fourth day. He didn't come inside. He stood at the door with his notebook and he wrote, "How is it?" She wrote, "Good, better than good. Tell whoever cleaned it and put up the curtains that I said thank you." He wrote, "It was Hector's wife," she insisted. She wrote, "Tell her she has excellent taste." He wrote, and she could see the slight curve at the corner of his mouth as he did it, "She'll want to hear that directly. She may show up with food." She wrote, "She is welcome to." He wrote, "Settled in." She wrote, "Getting there." He wrote, "Good." And then after a pause that she had learned to recognize as Grayson, transitioning from small to significant, the federal agent called this morning. "She wanted me to relay something." She straightened slightly. "What?" He wrote. "The tattoo you described. The 2 letters on the wrist. It was a match to a known identifier used by the leadership tier of the organization. Not foot soldiers. Not the people who do the physical work. The people who give the orders. They've been looking for a way to connect the attack to the leadership level for 2 years and haven't been able to get there." She stared at that. She wrote, "My description of a tattoo I saw from 40 feet away gave them the leadership connection." He wrote Torres's words where he wrote them carefully, clearly quoting. It was the detail that changed the scope of the entire investigation. She put the pen down. She stood in the doorway of the house, 2 blocks from the Hells Angels clubhouse, and thought about a Tuesday afternoon in late September and a man's wrist, and 2 letters she had almost not mentioned because they seemed too small. "What does this mean for the case?" He wrote. "It means it goes much higher and much further than 5 men at a warehouse in Red Hollow. Said they're looking at federal charges that reach into 3 states at the organizational level." She said he paused, then wrote, "She said you should know that what you saw and what you described may result in the most significant prosecution this organization has faced." Evelyn read that 3 times. She had walked past a warehouse on the way home from school. She had written 7 words. She had almost not mentioned a tattoo. "I was just going home." Grayson read it. He wrote back slowly, deliberately. She understood that he was choosing these words with particular care. The biggest things usually start that way. Someone going somewhere ordinary and seeing something everyone else missed. She looked at him. He looked at her. She signed "Thank you," the gesture she had used the day of the ceremony, the one he had recognized. He nodded in the same way he had nodded then. He walked back down the path. She stood in the doorway for a long moment after he left, looking at the street, at the ordinary afternoon world that kept being larger and more consequential than it looked from the outside. She went back inside and charged her phone, because that was the habit now, the inviolable habit, the thing she did every time without thinking about it. The phone hit 100%, and she texted Maya, "Call me when you can." Something happened. Maya called back in 4 minutes. The school in Prescott started on a Monday in November. Evelyn arrived with her backpack and her notebook, a new one, same kind, same college-ruled spiral bound, because the old one was in her desk drawer at the new house and was staying there. And the particular feeling of someone entering a space they have been told is meant for them, but can't quite believe it until they experience it. The thing that happened was that the student at the front desk who checked her in greeted her in ASL. Not written English, not a wave and a smile, and the careful, slow mouthing of words. Clean, fluent, easy. Evelyn stood there for a half second and then signed back, and the ease of it, the frictionless, immediate ease of communication with a stranger, which she had never experienced in an institutional setting in her entire life, went through her like something physical. The second thing that happened was that she met her homeroom teacher, Ms., who signed with the proficiency of someone who had been doing it for 20 years and for whom it was simply the language of her classroom. Ms. Arden signed, "We've been looking forward to having you. I want you to know this room works for you, not the other way around." Evelyn signed back, "That's new." Ms. Arden signed, "I know. It shouldn't be, it shouldn't be." Two words that acknowledged 16 years of it being the other way, quietly and without dramatics, without asking Evelyn to perform gratitude or relief or any particular emotion about the fact that a classroom had been arranged for her accommodation, rather than requiring her to accommodate herself to the classroom. "I know, it shouldn't be." She sat down at her desk. She looked around at a room full of students, some deaf, some hearing, some using sign, some using voice, some using both, all of it happening simultaneously in the casual, unremarkable way of a place where different modes of communication were simply the normal condition of the space. She thought about every classroom she had ever sat in before this one. She thought about Mr. Reyes writing on the board and being one of the good ones precisely because he remembered to face her. She had learned to set so low, "Face me. When you speak the important things down. Don't forget I'm in the room," and the frequency with which that bar was still not cleared. She opened her new notebook. She wrote the date at the top of the first page. She had never done that before. She had never felt like a first page was worth dating. Pages were for 7 words written in emergency, for back and forth with strangers, for notes passed under duress. This felt different. This felt like a record she wanted to keep. 3 weeks into school, she made a friend. Not Maya was irreplaceable and permanent and also currently in Red Hollow, texting her approximately 40 times a day, which was the appropriate number. A different friend, a new one. Her name was, she was 17, deaf since age 4, with quick hands and a faster brain and the specific kind of humor that lives in people who have learned to find everything slightly absurd as a survival mechanism. She had been at the Prescott School for 2 years. She was the student Grayson had mentioned, the one with the 3 university acceptances and the full scholarship. They became friends in the way that sometimes happens between people who recognize something in each other fast, without the usual courtship, without the period of careful mutual assessment that friendship usually requires. Sasha sat next to her in AP English on the 3rd day. The passage Evelyn had annotated in the margins of her copy and signed. "You read the same way I do." Evelyn signed. "How do you read?" Sasha signed, "Like the author is someone I'm arguing with." Evelyn looked at her margin notes, which were in fact a sustained argument with the author's thesis. She looked at Sasha. She signed, "Okay." That was essentially that. Sasha was the one who 6 weeks in noticed that Evelyn was carrying something. Not the notebook everyone at the school eventually noticed the notebook, the always charged phone, the particular alertness that Evelyn brought to every room she walked into. Something else. Something that showed up in the way she went quiet sometimes in the middle of conversations. Not distracted quiet, but heavy quiet, the kind that has weight to it. She signed one afternoon, direct as always. "What are you not saying?" Evelyn signed. "That's a very specific question. You do this thing where you go somewhere else for a second and then come back." Evelyn considered deflecting. She was good at deflecting. She had been doing it for 16 years in one direction or another. But she had decided trying to do less of it. She had decided that around the same time, she wrote "just beginning" in the notebook and crossed out "not done." She signed, "There's a federal case. I'm part of it. I saw something, and it changed the scope of the investigation, and I don't know yet what that means for everything. How long it goes. Whether I have to testify. Whether the people involved are going to be," she paused, "or whether this just keeps going." Sasha signed, "You stopped an attack." "Yes." "And you gave the investigators a leadership connection." "Yes." "And you're afraid it might not be enough." Evelyn looked at her. "Yes." Sasha was quiet for a moment. Then she signed, "I don't know anything about federal cases. I know about AP exams and university applications and what it's like to grow up deaf in a world that isn't built for you. I know this. You can't control what happens in a courtroom. You can only control what you already did. And what you already did was real." Evelyn signed, "What if it's not enough?" Sasha signed, "Then it's not enough." but it was still real. And real things matter even when they don't fix everything. Evelyn looked at her hands. She signed, "You're very annoying when you're right." Sasha signed, "I'm right constantly. You'll get used to it." The call from Agent Torres came on a Thursday afternoon in December. It came through her mother, who texted Evelyn out of class with 3 words, "Torres called." Evelyn got permission to step out and called her mother back through video relay. The way she handled phone conversations and her mother's face on the screen was careful and composed in the way it got when she was managing her own reaction to something while she conveyed it. She signed through the screen. "The grand jury handed down indictments this morning, counts, against 9 individuals across 3 states, including the leadership tier." Evelyn sat down on a bench in the school hallway. She signed 9 people, 9 people. Her mother nodded. As said, the tattoo identification was used in 2 of the 14 counts directly. She said her mother paused, recollecting the exact words. She said the investigation was able to connect the leadership to the operational planning of the attack because of what you described. Without that connection, the highest they could go was the foot soldiers, the people who follow orders. With it, they got the people who gave them. Ames sat with that, 9 people, 3 states, 14 counts, the people who gave the orders. She had walked past a warehouse. She signed, "What happens now?" "Torres says the case will take time, possibly years to fully prosecute." She said, "You may be contacted about testimony, but nothing is certain yet." She also said her mother's signing slowed, going careful again. She said she wanted you to know that in 20 years of federal work, she has never seen a civilian's eyewitness account have this level of impact on an investigation. She said she wanted you to hear that directly. Evelyn looked at her mother's hands. She looked at the hallway around her, the school that had been described to her as possible, the place where a stranger had greeted her in her own language on the first day. A classroom had been arranged for her, rather than requiring her to arrange herself for the classroom. She signed, "Tell Torres thank you." Her mother signed, "She said the same about you." She went back to Red Hollow that weekend. Not to say the new house was home now, in a way she was still getting used to, and the school was building something in her that she could feel growing, week by week, like a structure being assembled from the inside out. But she went back because Grayson had asked her to come by the clubhouse, and because she wanted to, and because Red Hollow was still the place where everything had started and she wasn't finished with it yet. She drove with her mother. 40 minutes on the highway in the early morning, with the desert going past and the sky doing what Arizona skies, which is to be more sky than seems necessary, more blue than any one state needs. They arrived in the afternoon. The clubhouse was quiet, not empty, but running at the lower register of a Saturday afternoon rather than the full volume of an event. Was there. Hector was there, sitting with his coffee and nodding at her when she came in with the warmth of someone who had decided she was his to look out for and was not reconsidering that. Danny was there, and he stood up when she came in and typed on his phone before she'd even put her bag down. "We heard about the indictments." "9 counts?" She typed back. 14 counts. 9 people. He read it. His expression moved through several things. Then he typed, "You did that." She typed, "The investigators did that." He typed, "You handed them what they needed. Don't minimize it." She looked at the screen for a second. Then she typed, "Okay." "We did that." He nodded. He put his phone away and sat back down, and that was that, which was another thing she had come to appreciate about the people in this room. They didn't let things go on longer than they needed to. They said the thing and moved. Grayson came in 20 minutes later. He sat across from her at the table and wrote immediately, which meant he had something on his mind that he had been carrying for a while and was ready to put down. He wrote, "How was Prescott?" She wrote, "Good, different." He wrote, "The school?" She wrote, "The teacher signed to me in ASL on the first day." Written English, not slow-mouthing, ASL. She paused and then wrote, "I've been in classrooms for 10 years and that has never happened." He read it. Something in his expression shifted, not surprise, she thought, but something like confirmation. Who suspected something was true and has just had it confirmed. He wrote, "I'm glad." She wrote, "Your daughter, the one in Denver. Did she figure it out?" He looked at her, wrote, "Yes." She did. She wrote, "But it took years it shouldn't have taken." He wrote, "Yes." She wrote, "I'm not going to need those years." Then he wrote, "No, you're not." She wrote, "Because of you, because of the school and the house and all of it." He wrote, "Because of you. We gave you options. You're the one who chose them." She wrote, that's a very careful distinction. He wrote, it's the right distinction. There's a difference between giving someone options and giving someone their life. Life is theirs. The options are just doors you walked through. She read it twice. Then she wrote, you're surprisingly philosophical for someone who runs a motorcycle chapter. And she saw the corner of his mouth do the almost smile thing more fully this time, closer to an actual smile than she had seen from him. Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my reputation. She looked at him and she thought about the first night, the 7 words, his face reading them and not dismissing them, the 60 seconds that followed. The way he had said, in writing, on a torn notebook page in a room full of strangers, you were never invisible. People just weren't looking closely enough. She wrote, can I ask you something? He wrote always. She wrote, that first night when I came through the door, what did you actually think when you saw me? He considered it. She watched him consider it, which with Grayson was always visible. He didn't pretend to be certain when he was thinking. He took the notebook and wrote slowly, I thought, this person is terrified and they came here anyway. And then I thought, if someone terrified came here anyway, they have something real to tell me. And then I read the note. He paused. Then he wrote, and then I thought about getting my people safe. And that was all I thought about for the next 8 minutes. Later, I thought about the fact that a 16-year-old girl chose our door. Out of every option she had, she chose us. She read it. She wrote, you were the closest people. He wrote, maybe, but you still had to decide we were worth running toward. She had no answer to that. It was too accurate to argue with. I'm glad I did. He wrote, so are we. The twist came the way the best twists always came in Evelyn Carter's life, quietly, from a direction she wasn't watching. It came in the form of an email forwarded to her mother's phone, which her mother showed her at the kitchen table of the new house on a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks into Prescott, 3 months after everything had started. The email was from a nonprofit organization she had never heard of called the Clear Voice Foundation. Subject line read, regarding Evelyn Carter Deaf Advocacy Award nomination. She read the email twice. The foundation worked with deaf youth across the Southwest. They awarded an annual scholarship and advocacy recognition to young deaf individuals who demonstrated what the email described as extraordinary contribution to community in the face of personal adversity. The email said that her name had been submitted by Agent Torres of the Federal Task Force, by a Ms. Patricia, the interpreter who had worked with her. During the federal interview, and this was the part that made her stop and read it a third time by Grayson Cole, chapter president, who had submitted a written statement on her behalf that the foundation described as among the most compelling nomination letters we have received. She put the phone down. She picked it up. She read it again. She texted Grayson, you nominated me for an award. He replied, which he did via text. Now they had worked out a system over the weeks. Him texting, texting back. I wrote an honest account of what I witnessed. They decided it was a nomination. She texted, what did you say? A long pause. Then the truth, that you are the most clear-eyed person I have encountered in 30 years of reading people. That you made a decision in 9 CT seconds that most trained professionals might not have made. That you did it without resources, without support, in physical distress, and that you did it not for recognition, but because it was the right thing. That the world needs more people who act on what they see instead of looking away. She stared at her phone. She texted, you didn't tell me. He texted, I didn't want you to feel like it was transactional. You didn't do what you did for recognition. The recognition should come to you, not the other way around. She stared at that distinction. The recognition should come to you, not the other way around. She texted, what does the award involve? He texted, a scholarship toward education, a ceremony in Phoenix in the spring, and a platform they ask recipients to speak, or in your case to sign, about their experience. To other deaf youth specifically. She read that last part. To other deaf youth specifically, she thought about every version of herself that had existed before 7 words in a notebook. The self that took the long way home, because fewer people meant fewer faces that looked past her. Was the self that carried the extra weight of being someone's accommodation, someone's asterisk, someone's special consideration. The self that had understood somewhere deep down in the way that children understand true things about themselves before they have language for it, that the world was not built for her and that she would have to navigate that fact every single day for the rest of her life. She thought about what it would have meant to hear, to see, to read, to know that someone like her had done something that mattered, not despite her deafness, not because of it, just because she had been paying attention and had decided to act. She texted, "Tell me how to accept." He texted back immediately, and she could almost hear in the brevity of it the particular satisfaction of a person who had been hoping for exactly this answer. "I'll send you the contact information." She put her phone down on the kitchen table. Her mother was watching her from across the table, with the look she had been wearing more often lately. The one that was not the exhausted look or the worried look or the too bright-eyed look, but a newer one, something that belonged to the mother she had been. Before things got so hard, something that had been sleeping and had woken up in the new house with the plain white curtains. She signed, "Good news?" Evelyn signed, "I've been nominated for an award." Submitted it, and Grayson, her mother's hands went still, and she signed, "What kind of award?" Evelyn signed, "The kind that comes with a platform. I would speak signed to other deaf kids about what happened, about what's possible." Her mother looked at her for a long moment. Then she signed, slowly, "My daughter is going to stand in front of an audience and tell them who she is." Signed, "Yes." Her mother signed, "Do you know how long I have wanted someone to give you that room?" Evelyn signed, "You've been trying to give it to me yourself for years." Her mother signed, "I'm your mother. It's different when the world gives it." She was right, it was different. Evelyn didn't say that because her mother already knew it, but she held it, the truth of it, the complicated, perfect, real truth of it, that a mother's belief in you was the ground you stood on, and the world's recognition was the sky you grew toward, and you needed both. You needed both to become the full height of what you were. Picked up her notebook. She opened it to a new page. She wrote at the top, "Phoenix. Spring," what I want to say. And then she started writing. The ceremony was in March. The foundation held it in a conference center in Phoenix, and it was neither small nor enormous, maybe 200 people, a mix of hearing and deaf, families and advocates, and young people and professionals, all of it organized with the particular care of people who understood that accessibility was not an extra feature, but the entire point. Evelyn stood backstage with her mother and Maya, who had driven up from Red Hollow and arrived at 7 in the morning and was wearing an expression of fierce, unconcealed pride that she was making no effort to moderate. Sasha had come. She stood near the wall, signing with a group of people she had apparently known for years. She looked over at Evelyn every few minutes with a look that was both encouraging and the specific kind of slightly competitive that was entirely affectionate. Grayson was there. She hadn't been sure he would come. He had mentioned it once, casually, in a text, and she hadn't pushed. But he was there, standing near the back with Carver and Danny, all three of them, dressed with the particular effort of men who don't usually dress up, but had decided this occasion warranted it. Danny had clearly tried to do something with his hair. She appreciated the attempt. She walked out when they called her name. She stood at the front of the room with Patricia beside her, who would voice her signing for the hearing members of the audience, and she looked out at 200 people looking back at her, and she felt the thing that she had felt on the first day of Prescott School, that frictionless ease of being in a space that had been arranged to include her rather than requiring her to arrange herself around it. She signed. She told them about the long way home. She told them about the industrial road and the empty buildings and the reason she walked it, which was that it was quieter in the specific way that mattered to her. She told them about the 5 men and the 90 seconds and the 7 words. She told them about running and the dead phone and the door she had shoved open without knocking because there was no time. She told them what it felt like to be believed. She signed, "In 16 years of being deaf in a hearing world, the most radical thing that happened to me was not the attack. It was not the investigation. It was not the 500 people who came to my street. It was the moment I wrote 7 words on a piece of notebook paper and handed it to a stranger, and he read them, and he believed me. Immediately, without questions, without the look I had learned to expect from people who weren't sure how seriously to take me. He read 7 words and he moved." She paused. "I had spent my entire life in rooms where I had to work twice as hard to be half as hurt. And in that room, I didn't have to work at all. I just had to be right, and that was enough. Still," she continued, "I want to say something to anyone here who is young and deaf and has spent time feeling like they are an afterthought in their own life. I want to say it as plainly as I can, Because I am tired of things being said in complicated ways when the simple way is true. She signed it slowly, each word deliberate. You are not a limitation, not someone else's accommodation. You are not the person they have to make special arrangements for. You are a complete person who sees the world in a specific way that other people cannot replicate, and that specific sight is worth something. It has always been worth something. The world has just been slow to notice. She looked at the audience. She signed, I ran 2 miles through desert heat to warn strangers. I did it because I saw what they couldn't see, and I was the only one who could tell them. That is not a story about being exceptional. That is a story about paying attention. I have been paying attention my whole life because I had no other choice. Every deaf person in this room has been paying attention their whole life. That is not a deficit, that is a skill. And it is time the world understood the difference. Stop signing. The room was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. And then it was not quiet. She felt the applause through the floor, through the soles of her shoes, through the air that moved with it. She felt it the way she had felt the vibration of 500 motorcycles on her street, the way she had felt Danny's pretzels down beside her as a small human offering with nothing expected in return. She felt it the way she had learned to feel everything fully, precisely, without the filter of sound, with the direct, unmediated physicality of someone who had never had the option of receiving the world at a remove. She looked out at the audience. She found Grayson near the back. He was not clapping. His hands were in front of him, and he was simply looking at her. On his face was the expression she recognized and she had first seen the night she handed him a torn notebook page in the Hells Angels clubhouse, the one that was not pity and not surprise, but something clear and direct, the look of someone seeing a person exactly as they are. She found her mother. Her mother was crying. The properly this time, no concerns, no holding back, just hands pressed to her heart and tears on her face, and the complete, undefended expression of a woman who had believed in her daughter for 16 years, through every obstacle and every dismissal and every year of fighting systems that didn't want to be moved, and was watching that daughter stand in the center of a room that finally had enough space for her. She found Maya. Maya was on her feet, signing "That's my best friend" to no one in particular and everyone simultaneously, her whole body in it. She found Sasha, who gave her a single nod, precise, approving, the nod of an equal, the nod of someone who already knew this was coming and was pleased to have been right. She stood at the front of the room. She thought about the girl who had taken the long way home because the world felt too large and too loud and too indifferent, who had carried her notebook like armor against a world that couldn't be bothered to slow down for her, who had stood outside the Hells Angels clubhouse and been afraid, genuinely, physically afraid, and had gone in anyway, not because she was brave in the way that felt clean and heroic, because she was human, and humans act on what they see when the stakes are high enough and the door is right in front of them. She thought about 7 words. She thought about possible. She thought about just beginning. She picked up the award from the podium, a small, solid thing, heavier than it looked, the weight of something real, and she held it in the same hands that had written in a shaking notebook, in a room full of strangers, on the worst and best afternoon of her life. The applause kept coming. She let it. She had spent 16 years in a world that moved too fast to notice her, and she was done buying the one who moved out of the way. Carter, deaf, guardian heart, the girl who ran 2 miles through desert heat toward people she was afraid of because it was right, stood in the center of the room and took up the space she had always deserved. Not because the world had finally made room for her, because she had stopped waiting for permission to occupy it.